Chapter 366. For a normal person, who am I? Was not a question at all. If they asked it in public, they might be arrested as a lunatic. But for a small group of people, this was the first question of the three ultimate philosophical questions in the world. This small group of people included philosophers and monks, especially eminent monks of great virtue. Who am I? Where do I come from? Where am I going? This question had troubled philosophers for thousands of years without a conclusion. So how could a monk answer it? Who am I? Li Yi smiled and said, I am just an ordinary citizen of the Jing kingdom. At this moment, Li Yi had replaced Master Tan Yin and become the focus of the crowd. Therefore, every word he said attracted the attention of the crowd. An ordinary citizen of the Jing kingdom. What Buddhist principles does this sentence contain? I don't know, but it's definitely not as simple as we think. Master, quickly explain. What does this sentence mean? The old monk from the cold mountain temple, who was acting as a translator, shook his head helplessly. Regarding the question just now, this young benefactor had clearly changed his concept and did not give a direct answer. Or did he not understand the deeper meaning behind it? The old monk sighed inwardly. His attainments in the Dharma were still insufficient, so he simply kept his mouth shut. The old monk, Ji Xian, sighed and said, An ordinary citizen of the Jing kingdom has such attainments. The capital is indeed a place of hidden dragons and crouching tigers. Li Yi ignored the old monk. He picked up the pastries on the ground, wrapped them in paper, and threw them into the garbage bucket at the side. He patted the shoulders of the obviously frightened servant girl and asked, Are you all right? Son-in-law, I'm fine. Xiao Huan raised her head to look at Li Yi and said with a smile, I don't care which country you are from. If you dare to cause trouble again, you will be dragged out and beaten to death. No one will help you. Li Yi said coldly as he looked at the group of foreign monks. Shouldn't monks be diligently cultivating Buddhism to deliver all living beings from suffering? To fight for power and profit, and cause trouble in other monasteries? Did they really think that they could become masters just because they shaved their heads? Master Tan Yin took a step forward and stood shoulder to shoulder with Li Yi, saying, Cold Mountain Temple's Water and Land Assembly. Everyone who comes is a guest. If you have other intentions, please go back to where you came from. Even Master Tan Yin had stood up, so there was naturally no need for everyone to be patient. That's right. How dare a foreign monk behave atrociously in the land of our Jing kingdom? Are you courting death? You can't even win against a master in terms of Zen, and you still have the face to stand here? Scram if you know what's good for you. Otherwise, don't blame us for being impolite. Not only did the foreign monk Lunefo who came to make a scene not talk about great Master Tan Yin, he couldn't even be compared to an ordinary young man of their Jing state. If he made any more outrageous moves, the nobles present might really do something. We're here to discuss Zen and cultivate Buddhism. Is this the attitude of your Cold Mountain Temple? What a famous temple in the Jing kingdom. It's just so. A young monk behind the old monk Ji Xian said angrily. The Buddha is not broken. Cultivate yourselves first. Li Yi said faintly. Only he would waste his time talking to these monks. If it were Miss Lu, she would have cut off his head with her sword and kicked him around like a ball. Just based on what the monk with the iron rod had done just now. His words made the young monk choke and speechless. Master Tan Yin and the old monk of the Cold Mountain Temple looked surprised. The people around them were stunned for a moment. When they came back to their senses, they all exclaimed, Buddha isn't broken. Cultivate yourselves first. Wonderful, truly wonderful. This young man's attainments in Buddhism are indeed profound. Well said, foreign monk. Go back and cultivate yourselves first. As soon as Li Yi said this, everyone applauded. The other party said that they should discuss Zen and cultivate Buddhism. But the next moment he said, Buddha isn't broken. Cultivate yourselves first. Seeing the foreign monk being defeated, everyone felt extremely happy. What foreign monk? How dare he come to the Cold Mountain Temple to cause trouble? Master Tan Yin and the real monks didn't even do much, but they all fell to the hands of a young man who wasn't even a monk. How could they still be called monks? Cultivate Buddhism, cultivate Buddhism. This cultivation is not the cultivation of others. Young benefactor, you're too stubborn, Monk Shi Xayan said with a kind expression. Master, you keep talking about cultivating Buddhism. Tell me, what is Buddha? Li looked at him and asked. They were the ones who provoked them first. If they didn't teach them a lesson, they would really think that they were easy to bully. Everyone secretly applauded. This was giving them a taste of their own medicine. The old monk's question was also kicked back to him. What is Buddha? They wanted to see how the old monk would answer. Amitabha, Monk Shi Xayan chanted and said, Buddha is wisdom, virtue and compassion. You are Buddha. I am Buddha. All living beings are Buddha. Buddha is everywhere, and Buddha is omnipotent. Pfft! Shameless. Isn't that what this young man said just now? Plagiarism. This is blatant plagiarism. This old monk is too shameless. Hearing Monk Shi Xayan's answer, everyone was filled with righteous indignation. They all spoke up and condemned this shameless plagiarism. Buddha is everywhere? Li suddenly asked. Buddha is everywhere, the old monk answered. Buddha is omnipotent. Li asked again. Buddha is omnipotent, the old monk answered again. If that's the case. Li crossed his arms and looked at him. He said slowly, Can your Buddha create a stone that he can't move? Old Monk Shi Xayan moved his lips as if he wanted to speak, but then he fell silent. Master Tanin frowned and seemed to be deep in thought, leaving the confused crowd behind. Why isn't the monk talking? Is he also invisibly demonstrating the Dharma? Can Buddha create a stone that he can't move? Of course he can. Buddha is omnipotent. Idiot. Since Buddha is omnipotent, why can't he move a stone? Oh, I understand. Buddha can't create a stone that he can't move. Idiot. Since Buddha is omnipotent, why can't he create a stone that he can't move? Who are you calling an idiot? I dare you to say it again. Idiot. Ignoring the two people fighting outside, everyone looked shocked. When they looked at the young man inside, they suddenly felt like they were looking up to a great mountain. How did he come up with this question? This was simply not giving the old monk a way out. No matter what he said, it would be wrong unless he took back what he said and admitted that Buddha was not omnipotent. But was this something a monk could say? He had actually sent all the foreign monks to their deaths with just his mouth. This was a master, a true master. While everyone was thinking about how Buddha could move the stone, Li had already passed through the crowd with the young maidservant and left. The question, can Buddha create a stone that he can't move, was adapted from a famous paradox in another world, called God's paradox. God's paradox meant God is not omnipotent. The Vatican in another world published a book that used the most popular mathematical deduction at the time to conclude that God is omnipotent. At this time, a wise man asked tit for tat, can God create a stone that he can't move? So this wise man was in big trouble, regardless of whether this story was true or false, and regardless of whether this wise man was eventually tied to a pillar and burned to death. A paradox was a paradox because it could never have an answer, unless the original hypothesis was overturned. Obviously, it was a hypothesis that old Monk Shi Xayan could not overturn. Therefore, for a long time to come, he would be trapped in this paradox and unable to extricate himself. Chapter 367. We have troubled you. Please don't blame us, Master Tanin. I'll take my leave. Master Shi Xayan left, and so did the monks from the Qi kingdom. They had no choice but to leave. They had come to talk about Zen and Buddhism, but if they ended up renouncing asceticism, it would be the biggest joke in the world. Before the middle-aged monk with the iron rod left, he scanned the crowd with his gaze before leaving expressionlessly. They had come aggressively and confidently, but when they left, they were crestfallen and looked a little embarrassed, as if they were fleeing. Master, you have a profound dharma. I admire you. Master Tan Yin accepted the worship of the crowd as a matter of course. Among all the monks in the world, who could demonstrate Buddhist etiquette invisibly, presumably, after today, Master Tan Yin's reputation in Buddhism would reach a new peak. Hey, where's that young man? Someone suddenly asked in confusion. When it came to defeating the foreign monk, that young man deserved the most credit. His words made everyone feel a little dizzy even now when they thought about it. He left. He just left, someone said, pointing in a certain direction. I wonder which family he is from. He is proficient in Dharma and has a deep affinity with Buddhism. He can be said to be an outstanding talent among the younger generation, someone said with a sigh. I know who he is. Tell us quickly. The crowd curiously gathered around a man in embroidered clothes. Although you haven't seen him, you should have heard of his name. The man in embroidered clothes said. He is the eldest grandson of the Li family who has been in the limelight recently. His calligraphy is better than Zhao Chun's, and he was conferred the title of Chong, and county magistrate by His Majesty. After being reminded by the man in embroidered clothes, the crowd immediately thought of something. The eldest grandson of the Li family was also a well-known figure in the capital recently. He was the only viscount conferred by His Majesty for many years. It was said that he was very close to Prince Ning's son and the princess. It was also said that he had a close relationship with Master Tan Yin. No wonder. He had such a profound Dharma, so it was not strange that he was friends with Master Tan Yin. The foreign monks came and left quickly. In fact, they did not cause much of a commotion. Most people did not know about it. After the crowd dispersed, the water and land ritual assembly continued according to the proper procedure. The monks of the cold mountain temple breathed a sigh of relief. Those who should leave had finally left. Today was a special day. If there was any trouble, they would be laughed at by the world. The old monk repeatedly instructed the little monk guarding the door that if any other monks came, he must ask them about their background, and not let anything like what happened just now happen again. That young benefactor really helped us this time, the old monk said with some lingering fear. The other party had come with ill intentions, and with their methods, even Master Tan Yin was somewhat unable to withstand them. If the young benefactor had not stood up to help them from the beginning, they would have been the ones in a difficult situation today. Master Tan Yin was silent for a moment before saying, entertain the Li family's old madam, and the Li family members well. Do not neglect them. Then he walked into the quiet room. About it, Li Mastert, Tant Mastert, Tan Yins, T.V. Li was not a philosopher, nor was he an eminent monk. Therefore, it was rare for him to be in a situation where his thoughts were not clear. Li Xian was not a philosopher. He was not a monk of great virtue, so he could not go around as he pleased. Li Xian went to meet up with his heir's concubine. His father-in-law also had elders present, so he couldn't wander around as he pleased. Li Immingzi stood at the side and said, it's all thanks to you this time. Otherwise, the cold mountain temple would have been humiliated by the monks of the Qi kingdom. If this got out, our Jing kingdom would have lost face too. Then he asked, when did you start practicing Buddhism? I don't know anything about Buddhism. It's easy to talk to these monks. When you can't even understand what you're saying, you can scare them. Li said casually. Those monks of great virtue were not normal people. If he wanted to talk to them normally, he had to become abnormal first. Emmingzi thought about it and said, we are like fire and water with the Qi kingdom. They are afraid of God's law. They won't act rashly on the surface, but they will definitely take action in other ways. What happened just now is an example. I don't know what else they will do. The monks of the Qi kingdom have always been different from Buddhism. They are loyal to the royal family. If they target you, it will be troublesome. You have to be more careful. What a pity. You were born a girl. Li sighed. What do you mean? Emmingzi raised her eyebrows and asked. Li said, if you were a prince and could become the emperor in the future, the Jing kingdom would be governed well by you. Emmingzi didn't say anything. Even though she was a prince, she didn't want to be the emperor. She just wanted to see the Li dynasty prosper. That was all. It's good to be a princess. There's nothing to pity, she said, shaking her head. Li Yi glanced at her. His gaze lingered on a certain tall and straight spot. He nodded and said, "It's good to be a princess." How are we going to explain this to the third prince? Outside the cold mountain temple, a young monk said with a bitter expression. The old monk, Jiexan, looked at the sky in the distance and said nothing. Bang! The monk named Du Nan slammed his iron rod on the ground, causing mud to fly everywhere. The iron rod sank deep into the ground. If that person hadn't interfered, how could the monks of the cold mountain temple defeat us? Du Nan's expression was ferocious. He didn't look like a monk at all. He said coldly, "As long as Tan Yin agrees to compete with me in meditation, his reputation will be ruined after he loses. No one will believe him. How can he be a monk then? At that time, our people will successfully take over the cold mountain temple. In time, we will definitely unify the Buddhism in the Jing kingdom. No matter who spoils the third prince's plan, they will go to a Vichy hell." The few young monks quietly kept a distance from the sadhu. Although they were all monks, the sadhu was clearly an extremely paranoid pervert. If it was not necessary, they would never want to deal with such a person for the rest of their lives. Amitba, now that the third prince is here, I will give him an explanation. The old monk Jiexan looked defeated. On one side was the country, and on the other was his faith. How to choose was even more difficult for him than the question of whether Buddha was omnipotent. Old monk Jiexan took a deep look at the middle-aged monk before he slowly walked down the mountain. The few young monks hurriedly followed him. The middle-aged sadhu looked back into the temple. A hint of darkness flashed across his face. He pulled out his iron rod and walked in another direction. Chapter 368. Once a person has obtained great material satisfaction, they will turn to pursue other things in order to achieve spiritual satisfaction. The nobles in the capital city were at the top of the society. They did not need to worry about food and clothing, so they would worry about other things. They worried about the past life, the present life, and the next life. Therefore, they came here on the first day of the Water and Land Dharma Assembly in the cold mountain temple to listen to the preaching of the eminent monks. They hoped to release the sufferings of the past and avoid falling into the hungry ghost realm or the hell realm in their next life, so that they could be reincarnated into a good family. Old Madam was worried about when she could hold a great-grandson in her arms, so she dragged Ru Yi to various temples. After listening to the Avatamsaka Sutra and the Sarangama Sutra, after listening to the Sarangama Sutra and the Diamond Sutra, only Ru Yi's temperament could calm down. Second Miss Lu had long left the organization. She found Li Yi and Xiao Huan and drank tea in a quiet meditation room in the backyard. The little monk of the cold mountain temple was very polite to Li Yi. He just wanted to find a quiet place to rest, so the little monk brought them here. The surroundings were so quiet that they could not hear the noise outside at all. The tea was also good tea. It was fragrant and had a lingering aftertaste. In addition to the excellent attitude, he also received a gift from the cold mountain temple. A wooden tablet the size of half a palm emerged from his chest. The wooden tablet was purple and slightly heavy in his hand. There were several blooming lotus flowers carved on the front, emitting a faint fragrance. It looked like sandalwood. Sandalwood was precious, but such a small piece could not be sold for much money. The old monk was too stingy, and the cold mountain temple was not particular either. They gave them scriptures and helped them to repel the enemy, but they only gave them such a small wooden tablet. It was not sincere. If the little monk did not say that this wooden tablet could be used in any temple in the Jing kingdom, he would have thrown it to Shanning to play with. The sun was shining brightly outside, and the tea in the meditation room was strong. Mississippi Lu was also quiet, which was rare. She quietly sat opposite Li Yi and drank tea. The extremely friendly attitude of the monks made her a little embarrassed to ask them to compare martial arts. Xiao Huan was bragging about Li Yi's great feats. With just a few words, she had rendered the foreign monk, who had come to cause trouble, speechless. Lu Rui looked up. It was no wonder she had heard quite a number of people discussing Chang'an County on her way here. She had not realized it back then, and only now did she realize who they were talking about. To Li Yi, there wasn't much to see in the water and land spell assembly. If he hadn't been dragged out by Li Xian in the morning, he would have been comfortably basking in the sun at home. This spell assembly would last for a full 7 days. From the looks of it, the old mistress didn't seem to have any intention of going back in the near future. Li Yi decided to go back with Xiao Huan and the others first. He would take advantage of these few days to prepare for his lessons. He would compress all the content he had to say in a few days and let them digest it slowly. In this way, he would have enough time to deal with the affairs of Qing and Prefecture and have a perfect honeymoon. The tea in Cold Mountain Temple was good. Before he left, he asked the little monk to pack 2 caddies of tea. Seeing the pained look on his face, he had a deeper understanding of Cold Mountain Temple's stinginess. The little monk wanted to cry, but had no tears as he watched Li Yi leave. If not for the abbot's instructions, such tea would not be used to entertain guests. It should be known that a few days ago, even the Prime Minister couldn't get 1 caddy of tea to taste. That was 2 caddies. Just now, the foreign monk came to make trouble and wanted to discuss Zen with Master Tanin. It's such a pity that you didn't see the scene. What? There was such a thing? Of course. That old monk asked Master Tanin what is Buddha. Guess what Master Tanin said? Master Tanin didn't say anything. He just, what a good way to demonstrate Buddhism invisibly. I'm afraid ordinary people like us can't reach Master Tanin's realm in our lifetime. Not to mention Master Tanin. I'll be very satisfied if I can reach the realm of the son of Chang'an County in my lifetime. What son of Chang'an County? The discussion of Zen just now was very exciting. Not only did everyone see what it meant to demonstrate Buddhist principles invisibly, but they also witnessed a young man defeating a Buddhist master with just a few words. As they chatted, they soon had new topics to talk about. Even who am I? Who am I? Can Buddha create a stone that he can't lift himself? Became the most discussed questions among them. The popularity of His Majesty's title of nobility had not died down yet. The 4 words son of Chang'an County appeared frequently in their ears. Now there was another wave of enthusiasm on the original basis. The king of Shu and a few young talents stood under a plum tree. He smiled and said, "This son of Chang'an County is also an extraordinary person. If there's a chance, I must get to know him." A young man standing behind the king of Shu hesitated for a moment and said, "Your Highness, actually, you've met the son of Chang'an County just now." Chun Liqing found it hard to describe his current feelings. It had only been a few days. How did he become the son of Chang'an County? Wasn't he supposed to be a talent with no background in Qing and Prefecture? Even Duke Chen's mansion was quite afraid of him. When the young master of the mansion was bullied, they didn't even come to question him. Instead, they strictly ordered everyone not to have any conflicts with the Li family. Oh, the king of Shu looked at him, and a trace of doubt appeared on his face. He asked, "I saw him just now. When?" Chun Liqing had also successfully hooked up with the king of Shu in recent days. Hearing this, he didn't dare to be negligent. He immediately replied, "The person standing beside the crown prince of Qingning, Li Xian, is the son of Chang'an County Li Yi. So it's him." The king of Shu narrowed his eyes. He had long heard that the son of Chang'an County had a close relationship with Li Xian. However, he didn't expect that the person just now was the son of Chang'an County that his father, the emperor, had made an exception to confer. Others didn't know the details of this son of Chang'an County. They just thought that he was lucky to be favored by the emperor. However, as a prince, he knew some secrets about him. Every single thing that he had done could be said to be earth-shattering, especially the heavenly punishment. Although he did not know what it was, he knew that it was the heavenly punishment that had played a role in their victory in the war against the Qi kingdom. It could make the Jing kingdom stronger and defeat the Qi kingdom. What kind of weapon was it? This was also the reason why his father, the emperor, valued him so much. If he also had such a help, he wouldn't have to worry about not being able to achieve great things. He was the son of imperial concubine Shui, and was the prince with the highest chance of inheriting the throne. He was knowledgeable and well-versed in both the literary and military arts. He had a wide circle of friends, and many of the young talents of the noble families in the capital followed his lead. His background was deep, and not only did he have the support of the powerful Chui family, but many of the senior members of the court were also his supporters. Countless people, including himself, believed that he would be the next emperor of the Jing kingdom. However, the current emperor didn't seem to think so. The crown prince hadn't been appointed yet, and the eastern palace was empty. As time went by, he became more and more uneasy. He wanted to control more resources, so that after his father passed away, no one could stop him from ascending the throne. He had never doubted his father's judgment. The fact that the emperor valued the son of Chang and county so much meant that there must be something that the emperor valued. Similarly, he also valued it. He was the dignified king of Shu, the next monarch of the Jing kingdom. As for Li Xian, he was just a crown prince. Smart people should be able to distinguish which one was more important. Chapter 369. Li Yi and the other two came out of the meditation room and walked out of the cold mountain temple, ready to go home. Along the way, they heard many people talking about what just happened. Li Yi was actually not willing to be in the limelight. The monk with the iron rod was too much of a bully. A foreign monk dared to be so arrogant in the land of the Jing kingdom. Of course, the most important thing was that Xiao Huan was involved. If that bastard had not dodged so quickly, he would have lost a leg. The family's carriage and the Li residences were parked together. He told the coachman to inform the old mistress and Rui. Li Yi, Rui, and Xiao Huan went back first. As long as it was not on the city's green stone slabs, the carriage was a kind of torture. The carriage slowly went down the mountain path, shaking violently. Li Yi did not forget the suffering he and Li Xian suffered when they went up the mountain, so he decided to go down the stone steps. The carriage from the residence would wait for them at the foot of the mountain. The Cold Mountain Temple's Water and Land Conference was originally very lively, but today was a special event for the dignitaries. The path that ordinary believers took was even less crowded than usual. Wait a minute. Li Yi was educating Xiao Huan about the bodhisattva's gender. The little servant girl's mouth was in an O shape, because she found out that the bodhisattva was a man. Mississippi Lu suddenly stopped and whispered. Li Yi stopped in his tracks and turned to look at her. Who is it? Come out. Mississippi Lu walked in front of Li Yi and Xiao Huan and said lightly. Under Li Yi's surprised gaze, a figure walked out of the dense forest in front of them. It's him. Li Yi's pupil shrank slightly. You know him? Mississippi Lu turned around and asked. Li Yi quickly answered. It's the foreign monk just now. He's the one who almost hurt Xiao Huan. This poor monk is here to send you to paradise early. The middle-aged monk was expressionless. Although he still had doubts about the exposure of his tracks, it was no longer important. Holding the iron rod in his hand, he dashed towards Li Yi. Mississippi Lu's eyes flashed. It was enough for her to know that the other party was an enemy and not a friend. Clang! A white light flashed like a waterfall, and her figure instantly disappeared on the spot. Li Yi guarded Xiao Huan behind him, in case there were other monks rushing out from other places. Soon, it was proven that the monk had come alone to deliver his head. Li Yi was not worried about Rui's safety. Although the monk gave him a dangerous feeling, he was probably not as dangerous as Rui. Sure enough, although the iron rod in the monk's hand was powerful, and every swing of it was as heavy as 1,000 caddies, the stone slabs of the stairs would scatter in all directions. However, it could not even touch the corner of Mississippi Lu's clothes. Seeing that she was like a butterfly fluttering in the wind, strolling leisurely amidst the shadows of the staff that filled the sky, the last bit of nervousness in Li Yi's heart disappeared at once. Instead, he was a little envious. He was afraid that he would not be able to reach her state in his lifetime. However, looking at the monk who was like a human flesh destroyer, he could not help but feel a chill. If the iron rod hit him, it would not just be a matter of breaking a few ribs. Deep anger rose in his heart. Was this still a damn monk? If he did not go down the mountain with Rui today, he would not have a good ending. Just for such a small matter, did he have to fight and kill? Madman, this was a king madman. Li did not know that at this moment, the madman in his heart had cold sweat on his bald head. He had originally thought that with his martial arts, it would not take much effort for him to deal with the young man, who did not even have the strength to truss a chicken. However, he did not expect that this woman, who had appeared out of nowhere, would become an insurmountable mountain in front of him. Lu Rui only exchanged a few blows with the monk who blocked her way, and she frowned. Not to say that they were evenly matched. She had thought that she would meet an expert who could catch her eye. However, apart from brute force, this monk had no other skills. He was even far inferior to the old monk named Tan Yin. She was not in the mood to tangle with him anymore. With a thought, the sword in her hand suddenly sped up, and a deep cut appeared on the middle-aged monk's arm. The iron rod also fell from his hand. Knowing that it was impossible to take that person's life today, if she continued to tangle with him, she was afraid that even she would have to die here. The middle-aged monk no longer cared about the iron rod, and with a stamp of his toes, he flew backward and disappeared into the depths of the forest in an instant. Mississippi Lu originally wanted to chase after him, but after looking back at Li Yi and Xiao Huan, she stopped. Damn crazy monk. Encountering a crazy monk, Li Yi's face was slightly gloomy. After going down the mountain, he did not go home first, but directly went to the county government. The capital magistrate had just been banished, and the new capital magistrate had not yet taken office. All the affairs of the county government, big or small, were personally handled by the county magistrate. The current Li Yi was not the same as before. He would not sit on the bench in the county government. As long as it was related to nobility, it would be a big deal. The county magistrate patted his chest and said that he would definitely increase the efforts to thoroughly investigate this matter. The portraits of the monks from the Qi Kingdom were also drawn by Li Yi. As long as they submitted them to the Ministry of Justice, they would issue a wanted notice. Within the capital and the surrounding counties, there would no longer be a place for those monks to hide. Uncle Li these days asked the guards at home to tighten the patrol and pay special attention to the monks who appear in the village. After returning home, Li specially reminded Uncle Li, "Young master, rest assured, if they dare to come, I will definitely not let them go back." Uncle Li's face flashed with an ominous glint. After saying these harsh words, he immediately went to warn the guards in the manor. Emingzu was right. Those monks without eyebrows and holding iron rods were indeed crazy. Who knew what they would do? Li Yi somewhat regretted asking Rui to let him go just now. This kind of person who hid in the dark and did not know when he would stab you with a knife was the best way to solve the problem once and for all. At this moment, on an official road outside the capital, a horse carriage was speeding at high speed. "I have said that I will give the third prince an explanation for this matter. Why did you act on your own?" Old monk Xiexan looked at the pale-faced middle-aged monk and said with a frown. At this moment, the middle-aged monk's face was as pale as a piece of paper. His forehead was covered with beads of sweat. The wound on his right arm was wrapped with a white cloth, and blood was continuously seeping out. However, although his face was pale, his expression was rather calm, as if he was not the one who was injured. In the face of old monk Xiexan's questioning, he did not say a word. "After all, we are foreigners. There is no longer a place for us to stay in the capital after assassinating the nobles of the Jing kingdom. We must leave immediately," the old monk said again. Then he sat upright and did not say a word. Chapter 370. Hey, the guard from the Viscount's residence actually came to my house just now. He said that we should pay more attention to strangers around the manor, especially monks. I wonder what's going on. What happened to the monks? Did they offend Lord Ju? In the manor where the Viscount's residence was located, a few villagers squatted on the ground and chatted. He also came to my house. He also came to my house. Another person nodded vigorously and said, the guard from the Viscount's residence said that if anything goes wrong, we should report it to the Viscount's residence in time. If we can provide useful information to Lord Jew, there will be a monetary reward. Someone immediately took over the conversation and said, I came back from the city today. There are notices everywhere in the city for the arrest of a few monks. It might have something to do with this matter. But then again, if any monks really appear in the manor, we have to quickly report to Lord Jew. A monetary reward, how long will it take to earn? A monetary reward was undoubtedly a huge sum of money for these farmers who lived on the land with their backs to the sky. Under the stimulation of the monetary reward, the word monk had become a sensitive point for them. Any bald person would have nowhere to hide under the noses of these farmers. For Li, his home was undoubtedly the safest place in the entire capital. Even the palace could not compare to it. With Rui and Rui personally guarding him, as long as it was not a group of 100 monks with high martial arts skills who came to hunt him down, there was no need to worry about his safety. Moreover, the arrest warrant for those monks had been posted all over the capital. If that monk had a slightly normal IQ, he would have long hidden far away. Li soon stopped thinking about the crazy monk. For the past few days, he had been compiling textbooks at home. First grade mathematics, volume 1. The princesses and princes still had some foundation in mathematics. After understanding and getting used to the usage of Arabic numerals, they could barely skip kindergarten and reach the level of first grade. There were many sets of textbooks that could be used, but none of them could be used directly. Therefore, Li still needed to start from the beginning. He had to recompile the things in the original textbooks in a way that was acceptable to the current people. This included understanding Arabic numerals, comparison of numbers, addition and subtraction within 100, addition and subtraction, and so on. These were all new concepts for the little prince and princess, and it would take them a while to digest. This textbook, which he had added and deleted several times, could be used as an introductory mathematics book for young children. Perhaps in a few years, when the young children of the Jing kingdom memorized the rules for disciples and saw a bunch of strange symbols in the book, they would curse Mr. Li in their hearts. Apart from editing books, he did not neglect his martial arts training. The fact that he had run into a mad monk while he was going up the mountain to pray to Buddha once again proved how dangerous the world he was currently in was. If he did not have the ability to protect himself, he would have to bring Rui or Mississippi Lu with him, wherever he went in the future. He practiced the new moves that Mississippi Lu taught him a few more times. When he felt that he had understood most of them, he turned around and realized that Uncle Li had been standing at the door for a long time. Uncle Li, what's the matter? Li wet a towel and asked while wiping his sweat. Uncle Li held a gilded invitation in his hand and said, Young master, the King of Shu just sent an invitation to invite you to a banquet at the King of Shu's mansion in 3 days. The King of Shu? Li's hands paused. Uncle Li nodded and said with a smile, Among the princes, the King of Shu is the one who is most likely to inherit the throne. He likes to make friends with young talents, and often holds banquets at his mansion to invite many talents. Everyone in the capital knows about him. Although young master has been conferred the title of the county magistrate of Chong, and by His Majesty, you have no foundation in the capital. You can take this opportunity to get to know the young talents of other families in the capital. If you can make friends with the King of Shu, it will be even more beneficial. Li frowned slightly. He had only met the King of Shu once. They couldn't even be considered as acquaintances. Why did the King of Shu invite him? Moreover, he didn't forget that the King of Shu had a deep grudge with Li Xian. From the bottom of his heart, Li didn't want to attend the banquet at the King of Shu's mansion. However, the identity of the King of Shu was too embarrassing. If he directly rejected the invitation, he would offend the king too much. It was fine in the short term, but if he really became the emperor in the future, he would have the final say in the huge Jing kingdom. How could he continue to stay in the Jing kingdom? Nowadays, Li had long gotten used to the rules of this world. He would no longer act foolishly without considering the consequences. It was obviously not a wise choice to offend the king of Shu. Even if it wasn't for himself, he had to think about the Li family and the Viscount's mansion. Of course, it was also necessary to talk to Li Xian. This invitation, just leave it for now. Even if he attended the banquet, it would be 3 days later. Li had to go to the imperial palace now. This matter could be discussed after he came back. The person accompanying him was Mississippi Liu. Although it would be safer to have Rui accompany him, she was now a viscount's wife. It was not appropriate for her to go out all day. Mississippi Liu didn't have this concern. After Li Yi entered the imperial palace, she wandered around the city alone. After 2 hours, she would pick him up at the entrance of the imperial palace. As usual, he first checked on the prince's and princess's homework. The results were very satisfactory. He didn't know whether they were worried that they would be criticized by the entire imperial palace if they scored 0, or if they really woke up and wanted to study hard in the future. At the very least, all of them could write the numbers taught in the previous lesson. What he needed to do now was to make them forget about counting and get used to this new, simpler, and more convenient method. After the 2-hour lecture, Li left the teaching materials behind and told Shanning to send someone to make a few copies. In the next lecture, he wanted everyone to have a copy. Emingzu was waiting for him outside the hall. The business cooperation between the two families had already been put on the agenda. Other than Rui Du and hard liquor, she also had ideas for perfume. She was very satisfied with the samples that Li Yi made last time. That kind of thing that could replace the perfume bag, once it appeared, would definitely be sought after by the daughters of the rich and powerful in the capital. Originally, it was just a business between the two families. After Li Xian found out about it, he insisted on sticking his foot in. Although he had never personally asked about the business of the prince's mansion, he knew that Rui Du and hard liquor had created a lot of profit for the prince's mansion. Now, compared to Qing'an Prefecture, the operation of the crown prince's mansion and the expenses for research were not small. This time, he was the first to propose the production of perfume. Li Yi could be worried about the cooperation with the prince's mansion, but he had no such concerns with Li Xian and Emingzu. Oh yes, are you familiar with the king of Shu? Li Yi suddenly thought of something and asked Emingzu, why are you suddenly asking this? Emingzu turned to look at him. It's nothing much. Today, the king of Shu sent someone to send me an invitation to attend the banquet at the king's mansion in 3 days. Even if he really wanted to attend, he had to find out what kind of person the king of Shu was, his temper, personality, sexual orientation, and so on. Although he had already told him some things about the king of Shu, beauty was in the eye of the beholder, and stupidity was in the eye of the enemy. In view of the grudge between the two of them, he could only believe half of what he said. Emingzu and he were brother and sister and grew up together. It was also a good breakthrough point. Chapter 371. The King of Shu's Invitation? Emingzu hesitated for a moment before saying, ever since I was young, I haven't had much contact with the king of Shu. However, he has always liked to make friends. Every few days, the king of Shu's mansion will hold a banquet. You are now one of the nobles in the capital city, and are of similar age to him. It's normal for you to receive an invitation. No way. You don't know him that well? Li Yi was a little surprised. Although the old emperor had countless concubines, and most of the princes and princesses had the same father but different mothers, they were still siblings with the same blood. Even if they were not from the same mother, they would still have some feelings for each other. Could it be that his thinking had been wrong all along? On second thought, it seemed to be more normal. Princesses were fine, but all princes had the possibility of inheriting the supreme throne after the old emperor passed away. However, there was only one throne. In the end, it depended on each family's ability. A good prince who didn't want to become the emperor wasn't a good prince. Princes would be lucky if they didn't fight for the throne. It was not easy to see touching brotherly love Given Mingzhu's character, it was unlikely that she would have many close brothers and sisters. She and Li Xian had been friends since they were young. The princes of the same age might have been beaten up by her when they were young. It was normal for them to be a little distant. Mingzhu thought for a moment and said, "Since he has invited you, there's no harm in going if there's nothing urgent." Even she had said so. Li Yi asked in surprise, "Is it really possible for the king of Shu to become the crown prince?" "No one knows what father is thinking." Mingzhu shook her head and said, "But from the current situation, the king of Shu has the greatest hope. Putting this aside, it's not good for you to embarrass a prince." It was obvious that Mingzhu did not have any prejudice against the king of Shu. At least on the surface, he did not look like an evil person. Li already had an idea. When he passed by the cafeteria, he habitually glanced at a certain corner. Li Yi was startled. Then he turned around and asked Mingzhu, "What's going on with Princess Yongning? Doesn't she need to go to school?" "Yongning is different from the other princesses. Father gave her special permission not to go to school." Mingzhu paused and said, "What happened to Princess Yongning? Why did she become like this?" Perhaps it was the feeling of déjà vu that caused Li Yi to involuntarily feel pity for the little princess. At the age of 6 or 7, she should be innocent and full of childlike interest. There was no reason for her to, and she definitely should not, remain in that shadow forever. Her mother died young, and she was seriously ill. This was what he heard from Princess Shaning. Mingzhu was more than 10 years older than Yongning, and grew up in the palace. She should know more about her. "Why did you suddenly ask about Yongning?" Mingzhu turned around and asked him, "I want to see if I can help her." Li said honestly, "You have a way." Mingzhu looked at him, and a glimmer of light appeared in her eyes. Although she had never interacted with Yongning, she was still her younger sister. How could she not want her to become like a normal child? "It's hard to say. I can only try first." Li Yi shook his head and said, "All the imperial physicians in the palace, including the famous physicians among the people, had tried to treat Yongning, but none of them had succeeded. If there was someone in this world who could cure her, Mingzhu believed that it must be Li Yi. Yongning is the daughter of concubine Liang. Concubine Liang died of an illness when Yongning was 2 years old. Perhaps because she lost her mother at a young age. Yongning's personality has always been rather eccentric. But it wasn't like this. She would occasionally play with princesses and princes of the same age. The reason why she became like this was because of a serious illness a year ago. At that time, Imperial Father summoned all the imperial physicians in the palace. The famous physicians in the capital were also summoned overnight. No one could do anything. They thought that Yongning would die, but they didn't expect that after one night, she would miraculously wake up. Her illness was cured without treatment. Even the imperial physicians found it unbelievable. Mingzhu sighed and said, "However, although she survived, she seemed to have lost all her memories. Including Imperial Father, she didn't recognize anyone around her. The imperial physicians said that her brain might have been burnt, and there was no hope for her to be cured in this lifetime. From then on, she became even more eccentric. She never spoke to anyone and became like this." Li Yi heard this and frowned. He only knew a bit of modern medical knowledge, and was not a divine physician. He had thought that Princess Yongning was just autistic, but he didn't expect the truth to be like this. If her brain was really burnt and she lost her memory, then things would be much more troublesome. In reality, whether it was amnesia or autism, even in the modern era, there was no particularly effective treatment. Things were much more troublesome than he had imagined. "You go first. I'll go back myself in a while," he said to Mingzhu, and walked to a palace beside the dining hall. On the stone steps in the corner of the palace, the little girl was sitting there. She was still hugging the doll in her arms and staring at the ground with her head lowered. "Hello, little girl. We meet again." Li Yi squatted down and smiled as he greeted her. Hearing the voice, the little girl raised her head. When she saw Li Yi, there seemed to be a hint of color in her eyes, but there seemed to be nothing. Li Yi took out the bead and waved it in front of her eyes. He reached out his other hand and said, "Thank you for the bead." I really like it. To thank you, how about I treat you to a meal? Looking at the hand that was stretched out in front of her, the little girl was startled. A trace of hesitation appeared on her face. After a long time, she carefully reached out her hand and placed it in Li Yi's palm. Li Yi let out a long sigh in his heart. He had finally taken the first step. Looking at the two figures holding hands and walking into the dining hall, the manager of the dining hall was about to go crazy. Cucumbers, cucumbers, hide those two cucumbers well. Don't let him see them. Consort Chen specifically asked for them to be put on her face. Kunlun purple melons, Consort Yan's favorite. They were just delivered this morning and are still fresh. We can't waste them. What are you waiting for? Go. And in that bowl of soup, hide it, it's too late, it's too late. The manager said anxiously and quickly turned around. In this short period of time, his face had already changed into a brilliant smile. He said, "This lowly official greets Princess Yongning and Lord Zhu." No need, no need. Li Yi waved his hand and pointed at the person who was desperately hiding the cucumbers behind his back. He said, "You come here. It's over." Seeing this scene, the manager of the dining hall's heart was bleeding. These were the last two cucumbers. Consort Chen, this lowly official has let you down. The manager silently mourned for the two cucumbers. Consort Chen's cucumbers were gone, so be it. He couldn't offend this Lord Zhu. Of the people who could steal the eldest princess porridge and still stand here, Imperial Consort Chen was one, but that didn't include Consort Chen. Li didn't kill them all. He picked a fresh cucumber, washed it, and broke it in half. He gave the front half to Yongning and nibbled on the rest as he pointed at the person in front of him and said, You, where are you looking? Right, I'm talking to you. Stop hiding, bring that eggplant, Kunlun purple melon over. Even Consort Yan's Kunlun purple melon had been destroyed. The manager of the dining hall's expression became even more bitter. The dining hall was responsible for the meals in the palace. Consorts without any status didn't have the power to order them around, much less foreign officials. Other than the imperial family, the only person who could treat the dining hall as his own kitchen was Li Yi. This was because he was not only the mathematics teacher of the many little princes and princesses, but he was also Princess Shanning's cooking teacher and nutritionist in name. This was what the old emperor had said. As long as he didn't tear down the dining hall, the manager couldn't say anything about what he did here. As for complaining to the emperor that this Lord Zhu was arrogant and despotic, provoking the resentment of the people of the dining hall, and using public property for his own personal use. Not only did he steal Consort Chen's cucumber, he even stole Consort Yan's purple melon. This kind of behavior was simply not tolerated by the law and would anger both men and gods. The manager really didn't dare. According to Eunuch Wei, the emperor had personally invited this Lord Zhu to a meal a few days ago. It was just him and the emperor. Who else in the world could have such an honor? Not even the prime minister. Even if he had 10 more guts, he still wouldn't dare to do this. Chapter 372. Li didn't make egg fried rice this time. The food in the palace was rich in ingredients, and many of them couldn't be found outside. It was a great waste of resources to only take some plain rice and 2 eggs. He carried Princess Yongning to a chair and let her sit quietly while he busied himself in front of the stove. In just half an hour, 2 bowls of steaming hot noodles were ready to be served. Some time ago, he had obtained the secret recipe of his noodles from his aunt. After Li Yi's own modification, the ingredients used were richer while retaining the original taste. Looking at the 2 sitting on the stone table in the courtyard, the aroma wafting far away, the manager of the food bureau swallowed a mouthful of saliva. After taking a glance at the pot, he wanted to cry but had no tears. You're eating noodles, at least leave some soup for me. The food in the palace should have been innovated long ago. Being able to make ordinary noodles so extraordinary, he might be able to gain the favor of those nobles. This was a great credit to him. Princess Yongning only lowered her head to eat, and was still unwilling to talk. However, Li Yi understood that going too far was as bad as not going far enough. It was already a great improvement for her to reach out to him. It would be good to change slowly. If he acted too impatient and caused her disgust, all his previous efforts would be wasted. After the meal, Li Yi held Princess Yongning's hand and walked back to the original place. There were already a few eunuchs and palace maids waiting anxiously. See you tomorrow. After handing her over to a palace maid, Li Yi turned around and waved his hand. Then he turned and walked in the direction of the palace gate. The little girl looked in the direction he left and didn't look away for a long time until his figure disappeared. Li Yi decided to teach them all the contents of the book in a short period of time, and then let them slowly digest and learn by themselves. That way, he would have enough time to do his own things. The number of lessons each month was set by the old emperor, but how to go about it, and which 4 days to choose was up to Li Yi himself. He only needed to teach them everything that should be taught. When he walked out of the palace gate, Mississippi Lu was already waiting for him in the carriage. Li didn't go home first. He planned to go to the Crown Prince's residence first. There was a need to inform him about the banquet that the King of Shu had invited. The gatekeeper of the Crown Prince's residence was very cordial to him. He told him that the Crown Prince had left early in the morning and should be returning soon. He asked him to wait for a while in the residence. When Mississippi Lu saw the guards of the prince's mansion flying around on the grassy slope at the back and having a great time, she lost all interest in drinking tea in her room. Li sat in a hall and occasionally saw a shadow flitting across his sight. Actually, gliders could only allow people to experience the pleasure of flying. If they wanted to fly higher, according to the current technology, they might not be able to build a human-powered plane. However, they could consider a hot air balloon. Li Xian was now studying air, levitation, or aerodynamics. Any one of these subjects was enough to take him a lifetime. It was unimaginable for Li Yi. Fortunately, he could enjoy himself, so he just let him be. When he was halfway through his cup of tea, he didn't see Li Xian. Instead, a maidservant of the Crown Prince's residence appeared. "Excuse me, are you County Magistrate Li?" The maidservant walked in slowly and asked while blinking her eyes at Li Yi. Li nodded and asked, "Has the Crown Prince returned?" The maidservant shook her head and said, "The Crown Prince hasn't returned yet. I'm under the orders of the Crown Prince's wife to invite County Magistrate Li over." "What? The Crown Prince's wife?" Li Yi was slightly startled when he heard the maidservant. The Crown Prince's wife invited him over? Where? He was indeed familiar with Li Xian, but he had only seen the Crown Prince's wife a few times. They didn't even talk to each other. Why was she looking for him? However, since Li Xian wasn't here, the other party was the master of the Crown Prince's residence. Li Yi couldn't refuse, nor did he have any reason to refuse. He was led by the maidservant through 2 long corridors, and finally arrived in front of a palace. "Lord Ju, please follow me," the maidservant said and walked in first. "Crown Prince's wife, County Magistrate Li is here." The maidservant spoke respectfully to the figure behind the curtain, before slowly retreating. Li Yi wasn't surprised by the curtain in front of him. The royal family, and those big clans valued etiquette the most. A man and a woman alone in a room should avoid suspicion. Otherwise, when Li Xian came back and saw him with his Crown Prince's wife, he didn't know what he would think. Although he had said that he would give the Crown Prince's wife to him, he was drunk at that time and couldn't take it seriously. In an unfamiliar environment, Li Yi would always subconsciously look around. This was obviously not the Crown Prince's wife's boudoir. It was more like a study. There were 2 rows of bookshelves, and there were some calligraphy and paintings hanging on the walls. At a glance, one could tell that they were the works of a woman. Li Yi could be considered an expert in these 2 fields. The calligraphy and paintings were new, and probably not made for a long time. It was very likely that they were made by the Crown Prince's wife. When Li Xian was drunk at Prosperity Lane, he had said that the heir consort he was going to marry was a noble daughter of the Jing Kingdom. Not only was she extremely beautiful, but she was also well-educated and well-versed in music, chess, calligraphy, and painting. From the looks of it now, It was not an exaggeration at all. It was a pity that he didn't agree to exchange with him at that time. I took the liberty of inviting Li Xianzi here. I hope you don't mind. Soon, a voice came from behind the curtain. The voice was very gentle. At first glance, one could tell that it was a well-educated and well-behaved girl from a humble family. She was the polar opposite of Mississippi Lu, who spoke with sword intent. Crown Prince's wife is too polite. Li Yi pretended that he didn't care and asked directly, "May I know why Crown Prince's wife asked me to come here?" In fact, Li Yi was not good at dealing with strangers, especially strange women, so he didn't beat around the bush. The other side didn't seem to expect that Li Yi would be so straightforward. After a moment of silence, she asked, "May I know when Li Xianzi and Crown Prince met?" Hearing this, Li Yi was stunned. Crown Prince's wife asked him to come here just to ask this question? After thinking for a while, he said, "It was only a few months. When you were in Qing'an Prefecture, right?" The voice came from behind the curtain again. "That's right." Li nodded and said. He raised his head and looked into the curtain. He felt that the tone of Crown Prince's wife was strange. Why did she ask this question? Was she worried that he would steal her man? There was no need for that. From the beginning to the end, his sexual orientation was very normal. As for Li Xian, he didn't have a sexual orientation at all. Then, how much does Li Xianzi know about Crown Prince? The voice from behind the curtain was still gentle. Li finally realized what was so strange about it. As the Crown Prince's wife of Li Xian, how could she ask him how much he knew about Li Xian? He was not Uncle Li from downstairs. Li Xian slept in the same bed with her. Shouldn't she be the one who knew Li Xian the best? Could it be? Li looked into the curtain again, and suddenly thought of a possibility. That guy Li Xian couldn't still be. How could it be possible? They were married for a long time. How could there be a couple who hadn't consummated their marriage after a month? Even Lu Xiaohui couldn't do it, unless the man had no sex. Pooh! There seemed to be something wrong. Chapter 373. There should be no problem with Li Xian's sexual orientation. After all, there was a period of time when his dream was to be sought after by countless women in Qing'an Prefecture, and not by those talented men. But now, his mind was filled with those strange things, and going to heaven had become his only dream. But why was this? How could a hedonistic son of the imperial family change so much in such a short period of time? What exactly happened to him? Was it his nature? Or was it someone else's intervention? Well, this was not important. Li Yi swore to the heavens that he had only inspired him a little. If he had known that he had the potential to become a scientist in his bones, Li Yi would not have committed such a sin no matter what. As the saying goes, it is better to destroy a temple than to destroy a marriage. To let a girl with impeccable family background, appearance, and talent stay alone and become a living widow. This was much more serious than destroying a marriage. Just thinking about the word destroying a marriage made Li Yi shiver. He couldn't help but think of Miss Chen's hysterical voice. If he didn't like her, then he didn't like her. No matter how much virtue he accumulated, or how many pagodas he built, it wouldn't be enough to atone for his crime. Li Xianzi. Seeing that there was no reply for a long time, the woman behind the curtain softly reminded him. Li Yi came back to his senses and said, Crown Prince is a good person. How much did he know about Li Xian? This was not a standard question. Should he answer very well, generally, or don't know? This Crown Prince's wife obviously didn't have any experience in dealing with strangers. Otherwise she wouldn't have asked such a low standard question. Good person? Yes, Crown Prince is a good person. Li Yi nodded and said, although using words like weirdo, stupid, and stupid to describe Li Xian might be more appropriate, he was in front of the Crown Prince's wife, so he had to at least give him some face. He had so many flaws that they were innumerable, but Li Xian was still worthy of being called a good person. Li Xianzi, can you give me more details? The voice behind the curtain sounded a little embarrassed. Li Yi sighed, thinking that this Miss Wang must not have had it easy, marrying someone she had never met before. Her married life must not have been very ruy. One had to know that Li Xian had expressed his opposition to this marriage a long time ago. He wanted to find a woman he liked and have a passionate relationship with her. It would be best if they could elope or something like that. Thus, no matter how outstanding the young miss of the Wang family was, she was not chosen by Li Xian himself. Naturally, he would shift his resistance to her. This was also the reason why Li Yi was here. She was in the best period of her life and was full of yearning for love, but reality poured cold water on her. She didn't want her life to go on like this. She wanted to change, but she didn't know how to change. The dignified crown prince's concubine was no different from an ordinary woman in this matter. At least half of the reason why things became like this was because of him. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "Just as I said, Crown Prince is a good person. He does not have the arrogance of a member of the royal family, does not like to put on airs, likes to pretend to be an ordinary person, and mingles with the lower class. He will definitely speak up when he sees injustice. He likes to drink, but his tolerance is very low. He will pass out after one glass of strong wine without water, likes to talk nonsense when drunk, and has a lot to say during meals. He likes to go to brothels, only listens to songs, and does not ask for girls. He also likes all kinds of novel or strange things. If you want to get along well with him, you must know that if two stones of different sizes fall from the same height, they will fall at the same time. You must also know that the ground under our feet is not flat, but a ball. From the Crown Prince's residence, it will take us a long time to return to the starting point. Recently, Crown Prince has been studying problems related to the air. Just like what Crown Prince's wife saw, those guards fly in the sky with big kites on their backs. In a few days, they might sit on a ball that can spit fire and fly even higher. In order to make up for his sins, Li Yi had exposed Li Xian's past. If it was not for the fact that he really did not know about it, he would have revealed whether or not Li Xian had a mole on his butt. Glancing at the woman behind the curtain, who seemed to be extremely shocked, he sighed in his heart. "Miss, I can only help you to this point. You have to walk the rest of the road by yourself." If it was not for the fact that he was worried that this noble lady's heart was too conservative and could not accept it, Li even wanted to suggest that she directly drug Li Xian's food. Once the rice was cooked, he would not be able to deny it even if he wanted to. In fact, Crown Prince's wife was not that shocked. Crown Prince's husband was a strange person. She knew this from the first day she married into Crown Prince's residence. On the night of their wedding, she sat on the bed all night, and he sat by the table all night. The two of them just sat like that, not drinking wine, not having the pleasure of the boudoir. None of the things that her mother taught her before she got married were used. Later, he slept in the study every night, and never once stepped into the wedding room. He was very kind to her, very kind. The two of them were more like strangers than husband and wife. She could not walk into his world, and he had never tried to get close to her. The two of them ate together, went out, and went to the cold mountain temple to pray, but that was all they had in common. Before she got married, she had fantasized about what her future husband would be like. Would he be a courteous young man? Or a violent playboy from the royal family? Or perhaps he was just a mediocre crown prince? However, none of these were true. He was courteous and not a playboy at all. Of course, he was not mediocre either. He was highly regarded by the current emperor, and was appointed as the supervisor of Jiangyi province. His ability was equally outstanding, and he could actually make people soar in the sky like a bird. He was so outstanding. He and Gu Shijie were people from two completely different worlds. However, she was not reconciled to it. She had also longed for a Rui husband, just like her current husband. She also hoped that she and her husband could be like her parents. Since God would not directly grant her these things, she certainly had to strive for them through her own efforts. Seeing that there was no movement behind the curtain for a long time, Li Yi shook his head. He did not disturb her, and slowly retreated from the room. Li Xian's imperial concubine was clearly a woman with her own ideas. This was something that everyone admired. Li Yi had tried his best to do what he could. He hoped that she could get what she wanted. Li Xian was the kind of person who could not be pulled back after he had made a decision. This was the most he could do. After all, things like entering the bridal chamber should be done by the couple themselves, and he could not help much. Li Xian had not returned yet, and Li Yi did not continue to wait. After leaving a letter, he dragged Mississippi Lu out of the prince's mansion. At the same time, a Finnish glider of the prince's mansion was also dragged away. The guards of Prince Ning's mansion could not keep something that Mississippi Lu wanted. Chapter 374. The King of Shu's Invitation? During dinner, Li Xian held a paper raft in his hand. He shook his head and murmured, "He's been targeted so quickly. As expected, no matter where he is, he'll be noticed in the shortest amount of time. Forget it, forget it. That guy is likely to be the future emperor, and he's very vengeful. It's not good to offend him." He casually put the paper raft aside, clearly not taking this matter to heart. Offending a prince who could ascend the throne was clearly not a wise decision for Li Yi. However, he himself was not worried. He and the King of Shu did not see eye to eye. But in the worst case, he could just return to Qing'an Prefecture. The King of Shu would not make a move against a powerful prince over such a small matter. In the room, other than the servants standing to the left and right, there was only the crown prince and his consort eating at the table. Husband. When dinner was about to end, the crown prince's consort suddenly put down her jade chopsticks and looked up at Li Xian. "What's the matter?" Li Xian looked at her in confusion. Although they were husband and wife in name, the two of them did not speak much, especially during dinner. These days he had long gotten used to this kind of silence. "When I was tidying up the study today, I saw a document that my husband dropped. It said that 2 stones of different sizes fell from the same height and landed at the same time. Is that true?" The crown prince's consort looked at Li Xian with a faint expression of confusion. "Shouldn't the big stone fall first?" Hearing this, Li Xian was startled. It seemed that he did not expect the crown prince's consort to ask him this question. It turned out that she was not only interested in calligraphy and painting. Other than the 4 arts, Li Xian suddenly discovered another side of the crown prince's consort. Inexplicably, his mood improved. He put down his chopsticks and stood up. Practice is the only way to test the truth. As for what the truth of the matter is, we'll know by doing an experiment. Walking out of the door, he waved at a guard not far away and said, "Lu Liang, come over here. Pick up 2 stones and climb up to the roof." The guards of the crown prince's residence were already familiar with this kind of thing. Throwing stones, leaves, silver, and what kind of effect would satisfy the crown prince? This was a piece of cake for them. How could this be? Seeing the 2 stones fall to the ground at the same time, the crown prince's consort revealed a look of perfect disbelief. Li Xian held her hand, and only let go after bringing her to the spot where the stone landed. He explained with a smile, "Actually, the size of the stone has nothing to do with its size. However, if it's a stone or a leaf, the result will be different." This means that our surroundings are filled with something that I call air. Seeing the crown princess looking at him with admiration, Li Xian only felt very carefree in his heart. Other than Li Yi, there was actually someone else who was interested in what he did. No, Li Yi had never been interested in what he was doing. He was an omniscient pervert. It was hard to find a confidant in one's life. Li Xian, who was in an extremely excited state, naturally did not notice the faint smile on the crown prince's consort's face. How could those guards fly on a kite? Li Xian furrowed his brows. He was aware of the situation, but he didn't know why. He scratched his head and said, "This problem is rather complicated. I only have some ideas. Let's go to the study room and talk about it." Hey. Take it easy. If you break your leg or something, I don't want to take care of you for the rest of your life. Mississippi Lu found a new toy. A low slope behind the Viscount's residence became her private territory. Li Yi stood at the top of the slope and watched speechlessly as she tirelessly repeated the climbing and gliding movements over and over again. He thought to himself that the height of this thing was not even as high as her own Qinggong. How old was she already? And yet she was still playing such childish games. Rui said with a smile. Don't worry, husband. It's not high here. Even if she really falls from above, it's okay. Xiao Huan enviously watched Second Miss flying around in the sky like a bird. She wanted to try it, but she could not make up her mind. She was afraid of being high up. The roof was already the highest place she could accept. Since a few days ago, the weather had begun to warm up. Today the sun was shining brightly. It was not suitable to stay at home. Of course, it was not suitable to go to the palace to teach. It was definitely a good choice for a family outing. Li Yi decided to ignore Mississippi Lu and concentrate on his barbecue business. When he came back from the palace yesterday, he patrolled the food bureau as usual and gained a lot. 2 eggplants and some rare fresh green vegetables. At that time, the manager's face also seemed to turn green. This was not very important. After watching Mississippi Lu fly the kite for a while, the little fatty and Duanwu ran over and watched Li Yi barbecue without blinking. The former swallowed a lot of saliva. The 2 old madams were basking in the sun and talking under the grassy slope. There were guards of the 2 families around them. In fact, there was nothing to be vigilant about. Within a radius of 10 miles of this manor, the Viscount's mansion was the only supreme existence. There would be no blind guy making trouble around the Viscount's mansion. Rui came over and helped him stir the charcoal fire. She said, Husband, remember to let Rui go with you when you go to the banquet at the King of Shu's mansion tonight. Ever since the incident with the crazy monk, everyone began to pay more attention to his safety. The old madam even transferred the head guard of the Li mansion here. Of course, with Rui and Rui there, it did not make much difference whether there were guards or not. However, Rui could stay at home and could not always follow him when he went out. It was fine when Fong was there, but now that Fong had returned to Qing'an Mansion to take care of the family moving to the capital, there was only Mississippi Lu by his side. Li nodded. He would not joke about his own safety. For the time being, he could only let Mississippi Lu follow him. When Fong and the others arrived, things would be much easier. Although the capital was good, it was not as convenient as when he was in Qing'an Mansion. Many times when he encountered something, there was no one around him who could be used. At the same time, he also lacked a key sense of control, which made him resist the capital in his heart. Okay, it's almost done, right? The aroma hit his nose, and the little fatty almost couldn't hold back his saliva. Li pushed away the fat hand he reached over and said, If it's not cooked, you will have diarrhea. Go play in the side, and I'll call you when it's done. The little fatty and Duanwu went to observe Mississippi Lu again. Li Yi tilted his head and asked Rui, What do you think of what I said last night? Rui smiled and said, Wherever husband goes, I will naturally go. Li nodded and said, That's good. During this time, I will take care of the matters in the palace as soon as possible. When the weather gets warmer, we will leave. Not far from the 2 of them, the little girl, who seemed to be paying attention to the second miss, scratched her head in confusion. Why did the young miss and the son-in-law never tell her where they were going? Could it be that they were eloping? Thinking of a terrible possibility, she immediately became nervous. Chapter 375. Tonight was the day of the King of Shu's banquet. Li Yi only intended to go through the motions and not embarrass the king. Therefore, he did not need to prepare much. In the afternoon, he was still preparing for his lessons in his room. If he wanted to return to Qing'an Prefecture as soon as possible, he had to get rid of those little troubles as soon as possible. However, he could not simply fool those little princes and princesses. That was equivalent to lying to the emperor. Li Yi could only work hard to be a dutiful teacher. Son-in-law, the clothes are on the bed. Xiao Huan walked in from outside and placed a stack of clothes at the head of Li Yi's bed. Although she was still Rui's personal maidservant, in this household, she was actually the same as the master. She did not need to do such menial work. However, when it involved Li Yi or Rui, she would do it herself and never let other maidservants interfere. After placing the folded clothes on the head of Li Yi's bed, she did not leave. With her hands behind her back, she walked with small steps to Li Yi's side and looked at the table. She thought to herself, what is the son-in-law writing? Is it a farewell letter to me and second miss? Is the son-in-law really going to elope with second miss and abandon them? What are you looking at? Lee turned to look at her and asked curiously. Since the morning, the little maidservant's actions had become somewhat strange. She clearly did not know a few words, but she still pretended to look at what he was writing. In the past she would never be like this. No, no. Xiao Huan shook her head like a rattle drum and immediately ran out of the room. Li looked at her with some inexplicable confusion. He found that it was getting late, and it was time to go to the King of Shu's banquet. Although the King of Shu was not the legitimate son, he was the eldest son of the current emperor. A few years ago, he moved out of the palace. Unlike the other princes, the King of Shu did not go to his own fief, but stayed in the capital. Not only that, the King of Shu's mansion was also widely accepted. Usually, the guests were not children of high officials or noble families. All the young talents were proud to make friends with the King of Shu. Of course, the King of Shu was also a dragon among men. He was well versed in both literature and martial arts, and had a very high reputation in the capital. For an ordinary prince, it was a taboo to not obediently stay in his own fief, and instead spread his wings in the capital. Now the King of Shu was still His Majesty's world. Was a prince trying to rebel? However, the King of Shu was not an ordinary prince. He was the first prince, born of noble concubine Shui. In the absence of the empress's legitimate son, the King of Shu was the only candidate to enter the East Palace, according to the royal family's principle of choosing the eldest son over the concubine. Countless people believed that the King of Shu would be the future crown prince and the next monarch of the Jing kingdom. Therefore, even the censorate turned a blind eye to his actions. In addition, the Chui family behind concubine Chui added fuel to the fire, causing the King of Shu's reputation to be unparalleled. Other than the fact that he still lacked the emperor's personal edict, he was no different from the crown prince. This was also the reason why Li Yi did not refuse the King of Shu's invitation. Although he felt helpless, he had to admit that he could not afford to offend the King of Shu. If the future emperor of the Jing kingdom bore a grudge against him, there would be no place for him in Qing and prefecture, or even the entire Jing kingdom, let alone the capital. It was easy to imagine what he would have to live in the future. Could it be that he really had to bring his entire family far away from the Jing kingdom and live a miserable life? It was not easy to live in this damn feudal society. He cursed in his heart, took 2 steps forward, and handed the invitation to the servant of the King of Shu's mansion. It's Li Xianzi. Welcome, welcome. The servant of the King of Shu's mansion had a signature smile on his face. When facing Li Yi, there was no expression of respect on his face at all. This was normal. He did not know how many marquises he had received. There were at least 80, if not 100, marquises in the capital. If he was not a guest of His Highness, he would not even look at him. Young Duke Qin, come in, come in. Not far from Li Yi, another servant invited a young man into the mansion with a face full of smiles. The servant behind the young man handed a brocade box to the servant and said, "This is the authentic work of Duke Xua. I know that Your Highness likes Duke Xua's calligraphy, so I spent a lot of effort to find it." Hearing the 2 words Duke Xua, Li Yi was slightly absent-minded for a moment. He only knew that Duke Xua was a calligraphy grandmaster in the Jing kingdom and seemed to have a high status in the imperial court. During Madame Dowager's birthday banquet, Yan Zhang and the man named Zuoqiu had mentioned him. County Magistrate Li? Suddenly, he heard the servant's voice. Li came to his senses and turned to look at him. He asked, "Is there anything else?" The servant looked at him and asked tentatively, "Your greeting." "Greeting?" Li Yi turned around and exchanged a glance with second Miss Liu. When the King of Shu sent someone to deliver the invitation to him, he never mentioned anything about paying respects to the emperor. Who knew that there was such a rule in the capital that guests had to bring gifts? Li Yi looked at the servant and asked, "If I don't pay my respects, can I not enter?" He thought that if this was the case, it would be a good reason for him to go home. No, there is no such rule. The servant was stunned for a moment, then immediately shook his head and said, There was no rule that one could not visit the King of Shu's mansion without greeting. However, everyone was a person of high status. It was the most basic etiquette to prepare a small gift when visiting. It was also a sign of respect for the King of Shu. After all, you are a viscount. Do you have to be so stingy? County magistrate, please. The servant thought so in his heart, but he could not say it out loud. He could only helplessly make an inviting gesture. He knew that the King of Shu wouldn't care if he paid his respects or not. But as a guest, how could he be so insensible? At this time, Li Yi had already noticed that except for him, everyone who entered the king's mansion would bring gifts. It seemed that there was such a rule in the capital. This was a good practice. When he made more friends in the future, he did not need to do business. He could just hold banquets at home every day. He was sure that he would receive so many gifts that his hands would cramp. Then he could sell them and earn money. Fortunately, he did not know this rule. He did not plan to invite the King of Shu in the future. If he could not take back his gifts, he might as well not give them. He shook his head and stepped into the mansion. As his personal female bodyguard, Mississippi Lou naturally had to follow him. "Miss, wait." The servant hurriedly reached out to stop her. "Why? Only one person can enter with one greeting card?" Li Yi turned his head and asked with a frown. No. The servant hurriedly shook his head. He pointed to the sword in Lu Rui's hand and said, "Since it was brought by County Magistrate Li, of course you can enter. However, you are not allowed to bring weapons into the mansion. You need to leave this sword here, and take it with you when you leave." The King of Shu was a very important person. If something happened to him, no one related to him would be able to escape. Of course, this included all the servants in the mansion. Although the strict rules in the mansion were not as strict as those in the palace, there was a strict rule. Except for the guards in the mansion, no one was allowed to bring weapons into the mansion. Of course, such a long sword could not be brought in. Mississippi Lou's sword was almost always with her. Once, Li Yi could not find a suitable weapon to kill fish. He stole Mississippi Lou's sword when she was not paying attention. As a result, he was chased by her for half a day. His buttocks were swollen, and he could not get out of bed for 2 days. It could be seen how much she treasured this sword. He thought that she would refuse. Unexpectedly, she only glanced at the servant indifferently and placed the sword on the table behind her. "Watch it carefully," Li Yi reminded the servant. The servant smiled and nodded. However, in his heart, he despised the sword. What was there to be careful of with such a broken sword? Any sword in the mansion was many times better than this. He raised his head and looked at Li Yi. He was extremely suspicious. Why would the prince invite such a country bumpkin? Chapter 376. A small viscount was not worthy of the servants of the King of Shu's mansion to treat him with respect, let alone a country bumpkin viscount. A servant led him to a large pavilion and placed him in a relatively remote corner. The interior of the building was brightly lit. From time to time, people would enter and leave, and the surroundings were filled with noises. On the table in front of him were all sorts of fruits, vegetables, and pastries. The drinks were of high quality, and the standard was not low. From this, it could be seen that the King of Shu was also a man of taste. There were rows of tables on both sides. At this time, some of the tables were already occupied, and some acquaintances were gathered together, laughing and chatting loudly. More than 10 dancers were dancing on the red carpet in the center. Their ankles were bare, and their clothes were revealing. As they danced, a piece of smooth skin would often be exposed. If he didn't know that this was the King of Shu's mansion, Li Yi might have thought that this was a place like the Myriad Fragrance Pavilion or the Jade Courtyard. The dancers danced so coquettishly that many people stared at them, as if their souls had been hooked. "Is it beautiful?" Just as Li Yi was engrossed in watching, a faint voice came from beside him. "Beautiful." Li Yi nodded. As soon as he said this word, he immediately realized something. He changed his tone and said with a serious expression, "Beautiful my ass. This is not a dance. It's obviously coquettish. It's an insult to the culture. I didn't expect the King of Shu to be such a person. It's really disappointing." Li Yi deeply condemned the hypocritical behavior of the king of Shu. He moved his eyes away from the dancers and chanting figures, and focused on drinking a pot of grape wine in front of him. As he raised his glass, he stole a glance at the scene. The king of Shu was also a person who knew how to enjoy this figure, this waist, this flexibility. Even without looking at their faces, he could give these dancers a superb evaluation. This occasion was actually not suitable for Mississippi Lu. There was no other woman here except her. In this era, there were not many entertainment activities. It was normal for a group of men to gather together to watch an erotic dance. If not for the special status of the king of Shu inviting this group of people to a banquet in a brothel, the atmosphere would definitely be more harmonious. Of course, Li Yi didn't have dirty thoughts like most people. He was purely appreciating art. Unfortunately, Mississippi Lu's artistic attainment was still far from his. She only saw their flirtatious and explicit side, but didn't understand the essence of the dancer's dance. How dare you? How dare you talk about the king of Shu behind his back? Although Li Yi had deliberately lowered his voice when he spoke just now, it was still heard by someone at the neighboring table. A well-dressed young man with a scholarly aura stood up from his seat and loudly reprimanded him. Li Yi didn't expect him to have such a big reaction. He didn't have much interaction with the king of Shu, so there was no grudge between them. What he said just now was just a joke. But looking at the young man's reaction, it was as if he had insulted his ancestors. Li Yi raised his head, looked at him and said, "It was just a joke. Why do you take it so seriously?" The young man snorted and said, "How can you joke about the king of Shu's status?" Li Yi frowned. There was no enmity between the two of them. It was a little too much for the young man to latch onto his unintentional words. Even if he wanted to curry favor with the king of Shu, he didn't have to use such a method, right? This kind of person couldn't be bothered with. The more he was bothered, the more excited he would be. Li Yi could pack up and go home after he was done today. He didn't even stand up, and turned his head to continue admiring the art. The young man opened his mouth, but he didn't know how to continue the words he had prepared. Of course, it had nothing to do with him if someone spoke rudely to the king of Shu. But if he didn't do something special tonight, how could he get the attention of the king of Shu? Everyone knew that the king of Shu was the most promising one among all the princes to ascend to the throne. For them, getting close to the king of Shu and befriending him was undoubtedly a shortcut to the peak of life. However, there were many people who had the same idea as him, including many high-ranking officials and dignitaries. He could only write a few good poems. In the end, he was just a commoner. If he wanted to stand out, he naturally had to do something different. When someone spoke rudely to the king of Shu, he had to stand up and reprimand him righteously, expressing his endless admiration for the king of Shu. Even if he could win a little favor from the king of Shu, it would be enough. Of course, he was selective. He couldn't afford to offend the person who was respectfully invited by the steward of the prince's mansion. But the person who was brought here with a look of disdain by the servants of the prince's mansion and sat in a more remote place than him was, of course, the best choice. The young man in front of him, who looked unfamiliar and obviously didn't have a strong background, was a very good breakthrough. He had already predicted what would happen next. He was just waiting for the servants of the prince's mansion to chase the guy who spoke rudely to the king of Shu out, so that he could show his face a little. But he didn't expect that the other party would be so cowardly, making all his preparations go up in smoke. If he continued to pester him, he was afraid that he would be chased out by the steward of the prince's mansion as a troublemaker. Helplessly, the young man glanced at Li Yi and could only sit back down. Is the king of Shu very famous? Mississippi Lu grabbed the wine pot from Li Yi's hand and poured herself a glass of grape wine. She looked around with her beautiful eyes. Even though she was not familiar with the princesses and kings of the royal family, she didn't think that an ordinary prince could handle such a scene. Not only is he famous, he is the prince who is most likely to become the emperor in the future. How can he not be famous? Li Yi said lazily. Lu Rui pursed her lips and said, "Is it good to be the emperor?" Most of the time, Mississippi Lu was cold, But she was also quite cute when she was playful. Li Yi glanced at her and said in a low voice, "Of course it's good to be the emperor. Who doesn't want to be the emperor? He has the final say in such a big country. He can decide the life and death of people with one word. And he can decide the fate of countless people with one thought. More importantly, after becoming the emperor, he can marry many concubines. He can have 3 palaces and 6 courtyards, 72 concubines, and 3,000 beauties in the harem." Li Yi glanced at Mississippi Lu and saw her unkind eyes. He said righteously, "So, there is really nothing good about being the emperor. The main thing is that the body can't take it. If you don't believe me, think about it. Which emperor in history has lived a long life?" Li Yi used facts to prove why being the emperor was not good at all. If one wanted to live a long life, he had to give up the emperor's position as soon as possible. The right way was to consolidate his foundation and strengthen his body and kidneys. At some point, the noisy crowd suddenly became quiet, and people began to rush to the door. Li Yi turned his head and saw a few figures, led by the king of Shu, walking in from outside. The main character had arrived. In order to show respect to the king of Shu, most people stood up from their seats and went forward to welcome him, regardless of their status. Li Yi and Mississippi Lu's seats were in the most remote corner of the hall. The young man beside him had already gone forward to welcome them. Looking at the king of Shu, who was surrounded by many people, Li Yi made the wise decision to sit here. The crowd quickly dispersed and the king of Shu walked forward, surrounded by the crowd. Li Yi glanced at him inadvertently and saw a figure behind the king of Shu that surprised him. Why is he here too? Seeing the slightly familiar face, Li Yi murmured in surprise. Cui Yinxin, a former Jinshi. When he made things difficult for Wan Ruoqing in Prince Ning's mansion, he had a conflict with him. He didn't know what happened after that. He didn't expect to see him on such an occasion. Wait a minute. The king of Shu's mother is concubine Cui. The Cui family's sphere of influence is in Lin city of Qing and prefecture. Cui Yinxin's surname is also Cui. Obviously, he is the king of Shu's follower now. Is there any connection between these two? Chapter 377. As the saying goes, enemies are bound to meet on a narrow road. Now that they had bumped into each other, the atmosphere was a little awkward. Fortunately, the corner where Li Yi and Rui were at was remote and secluded enough. Cui Yinxin's attention seemed to be on the king of Shu, and did not see him. She shifted her gaze away from Cui Yinxin's body. Suddenly, she felt as if someone's gaze had landed on her. Li Yi looked up and saw a familiar face diagonally in front of him. If he remembered correctly, that scholarly young man's name was Chun Liqing, a member of Duke Chen's estate. Just a few days ago, under the plum tree in the Cold Mountain Temple, Chun Liqing had argued with him. In the end, Li Xian's bodyguards had broken the legs of the servants in his clan. Speaking of which, the conflict between the two of them was not small. It was a mistake to attend the king of Shu's banquet tonight. He only had a few enemies in the capital, but he had met almost all of them. The king of Shu stood in front of the crowd with a cup of wine in his hand and said, "Thank you for giving I face and attending the banquet in my mansion. I will drink the first cup of wine as a sign of respect." Of course, this sentence was out of politeness. Among all the young talents in the capital, except for Li Xian, who dared not to give face to the king of Shu, no one would be willing to offend the future emperor. Due to their status, their clans might not have official dealings with the king of Shu, but the relationship between the younger generation had always been more ambiguous. On this point, regardless of whether one was a staunch supporter of the king of Shu, the decisions made were generally the same. There was nothing wrong with befriending the king of Shu. They had to leave a way out for their families. After the king of Shu drank a cup of wine, the atmosphere in the banquet became lively. Eating, drinking, and having fun were the main theme of the banquet. Some people took this opportunity to connect with old friends, while others talked in low voices with the king of Shu. They were full of smiles, and their eyes were full of lust. The king of Shu listened and nodded his head repeatedly. It was unknown what kind of shady deals they had secretly made. The dancers had already retreated, leaving behind a group of men who were whispering to each other. Those who were in the know would have thought that this was the banquet of the king of Shu, while those who didn't would have thought that they had come to a large-scale gay dating party. Li, on the other hand, was different. Although Mississippi Lu was not very willing to talk, it was impossible for them to be intimate. However, she was still beautiful. Glancing at her would inexplicably improve his mood, wouldn't it? Li was in a good mood, but some people were in a bad mood. Cui Yinxin was one of them. As a new Jinsher and a descendant of the Cui family, although he was only a member of a branch family, under the influence of the Cui family, he could seek a better job and work hard for a few years. Although he might not have a bright future, it would be much better than his current situation of waiting at home. Wasn't it because in Ning Wangfu, he had belittled a lowly performer? A new Jinsher. How did he end up like this? Of course, Cui Yinxin knew why he ended up like this. He didn't dare to hate Ning Wang, the Ministry of Personnel, and of course, he didn't dare to hate the current emperor. He only hated the detestable Anqi County magistrate, who had stood up for the lowly performer, causing him to lose face that night. Even now, the hat of expressing sorrow because of a new poem was firmly pinned on his head, becoming a lifetime of shame. If he didn't take revenge, he wouldn't be a gentleman, but not now. Cui Yinxin clenched his teeth. What he had to do now was to closely follow the king of Shu and do his best to gain the prince's attention. When the prince ascended to the throne in the future, he would definitely not mistreat him. It was never too late for a gentleman to take revenge 10 years later. Moreover, everyone knew that the emperor's physical condition would definitely not last another 10 years. At that time, he would definitely pay back the humiliation he had suffered 100-fold. Greetings, young Master Cui. Cui Yinxin raised his wine cup and repeatedly toasted the people around him. They were more or less related to the Cui family and were also close to the king of Shu. Naturally, his status had also risen. From a certain perspective, the incident at Ning Wangfu was not completely without benefits for him. Tonight, the people at the king of Shu Wangfu were the true upper-class people in the capital. If he could befriend one more person, he would have one more way out in the future. Cui Yinxin's gaze swept across the hall. Suddenly, his body stiffened and a look of disbelief appeared on his face. It's him. How could it be impossible? How could he be here? Cui Yinxin shook his head fiercely and chased that unrealistic thought out of his mind. That detestable fellow was the Anqi County magistrate. He should be in Qing'an Prefecture now. How could he appear in the capital and at the king of Shu's banquet? His hatred for him must be too strong, causing him to hallucinate. Cui Yinxin gulped down a mouthful of wine and swept his gaze across the crowd again. That detestable face once again appeared in his line of sight. Pfft! He spat out all the wine that he had not swallowed in time. One of the people who passed by Cui Yinxin was lucky enough to enjoy a wine bath. He wiped his face, but before he could show his anger, he saw that the person opposite him was even angrier than him. The person strode towards the corner with large strides. What are you looking at? No matter how calm she was, she could not stand being stared at for so long. Rui turned back and glared fiercely at Li. Stingy. It's not like I'll lose a piece of flesh if I stare a few more times. Li pursed his lips. Mississippi Lu was usually cold and gave off a mature and aloof feeling. However, she was only 17 years old. Her face was so tender and full of collagen. When he looked closely at her, he could see the tenderness under her cold exterior. He was a little curious. Logically speaking, two people who grew up in the same environment should not have such a big difference in their personalities. Rui was gentle, and Wanru was gentle, while Mississippi Lu was like a tigress. How did they develop such a tigress? Out of curiosity, he had wanted to interview her. However, after careful consideration, he gave up on the idea. If she knew that he had compared her to a tigress, Li could not guarantee that he would be able to return home in one piece. Why are you here? At this moment, a voice full of suppressed anger came from the front. Li turned his head and saw Cui Yinxin, who was gnashing his teeth. It was his own embarrassment. Li looked up at him and asked, "Why can't I be here?" He felt depressed in his heart. The reason why he had a conflict with Cui Yinxin was because Cui Yinxin had bullied his friend in front of him. Cui Yinxin had copied the poem and slapped his face because he had forced him to. Why was he still biting him? People often said that meeting an old friend in a foreign land should be one of the 4 happy events in life. Even if he did not put this matter on the same level as the wedding night, he should not be so unfriendly as soon as they met, right? Although Cui Yinxin was only a small official in the King of Shu's residence, who was the King of Shu? No one dared to look down on the people around him, who knew that he would become a high-ranking official in the court in 2 years. Therefore, his every move attracted the attention of many people present. The young scholar sitting beside Li Yi was slightly startled when he saw this. Then, joy appeared on his face. He knew that his opportunity had come. He stood up from his seat and pointed at Li Yi. Yes, someone like him who does not respect the King of Shu has no right to sit here. Cui Yinxin looked at him. The young man immediately said, adding oil to the fire, "Sir, you may not know, but just now." Li Yi rubbed the space between his eyebrows. The King of Shu really did not reject talented people. Take the person beside him, for example. If he was a storyteller in a brothel, he would definitely have a much better future than studying. He quietly watched the young man's spittle fly. Cui Yinxin's face was gloomy. Occasionally, he would look at him with eyes that seemed to be spewing fire. Several people around them had already noticed the strange situation and looked over with puzzled eyes. Chapter 378. Is that young Master Cui? Cui Yinxin was a member of the King of Shu's mansion. His actions usually represented the attitude of the King of Shu. Seeing his angry expression, the surrounding people cast curious looks at him. Young Master Cui seems to be very angry. What happened just now? I don't know, but that person looks a little strange. I've never seen him before. I didn't expect him to be qualified to attend His Highness's banquet. It seems that he and Cui Yinxin have a big grudge, but they happened to meet here. He can only blame his bad luck. The King of Shu had a wide range of friends, whether they were high officials or poor disciples. As long as they had a certain characteristic that caught the eye of His Highness, they could become guests of the King of Shu's mansion. However, in the end, there were still differences in status among the guests. Having the qualifications to attend the banquet did not mean that His Highness valued him. At least, this young man who had offended Cui Yinxin had unfortunately bumped into the tip of the knife this time. While listening to the young man's spittle describing how disrespectful Li Yi was to the King of Shu, Cui Yinxin gradually calmed down. He had been so agitated just now because of his strong resentment against him. But he was very clear that this was the King of Shu's mansion. Even if he was a person of His Highness, he could not act without scruples. If Li Yi was really a guest that the King of Shu valued, he naturally could not let him do anything that would displease His Highness, although the possibility was very small. The scholar sitting at the table next to Li Yi said with a righteous expression, "What kind of status does Her Highness have? How can he insult her? In my opinion, such a person is not fit to sit here with all of you." This place could be considered as a secluded area in the hall, so naturally, the guests were not very important. At this moment, when they heard the scholar's description, they only felt that this young man was too pedantic. Even visiting a brothel was an elegant thing for them. So what if there were a few scantily clad dancers? What did they count for? However, there were a few people who were quite disdainful of this scholar's behavior. He was a typical bootlicker who wanted to raise himself and gain His Highness's attention. He was even worse than the young man who spoke without thinking. Without waiting for Cui Yinxin to speak, a steward beside him frowned and said, "The King of Shu's residence does not welcome people who disrespect His Highness. While His Highness does not know about this, you should leave on your own." Cui Yinxin raised his eyebrows, but did not stop him. According to the King of Shu's character, he would not fly into a rage just because of a few rude words. At most, he would just chase him out. Since the outcome would be the same no matter what, there was no point in him interfering. After all, he had only been by Her Highness' side for a short period of time. If he did too much, Her Highness would be displeased. However, he already knew that the other party was in the capital. The grudges between the two of them could be slowly settled in the future. The way things had developed was obviously out of Rui's expectations. Li Yi's words to change the topic had been misinterpreted by the other party. She did not know what Li Yi was thinking, but he had just said that the king of Shu was not an ordinary person. He was the future emperor of the Jing kingdom, and could not be offended. If he could befriend the king of Shu, it would be of great benefit to him in the future. Otherwise, with his lazy character, why would he attend this kind of banquet? Lu Rui frowned slightly. She wanted to step forward to explain. This was an extremely rare occurrence for her to begin with. If she was the only one who encountered such a thing, she would have left in anger. At this moment, Li Yi stood up and patted her shoulder, saying, "Let's go." His tone was very calm, and there was no expression of annoyance or indignation on his face. It was as if he was doing something that could not be more ordinary. Lu Rui looked at him, and then coldly looked around before following him out. If you knew this would happen, why did you do it in the first place? Trouble comes from the mouth. In a place like this, you should be careful with your words. That girl is a rare beauty. It would be a pity if we could get to know her. The guests at the nearby tables shook their heads and discussed for a while. They did not take it to heart. They only thought that they had to be careful with their words in the king of Shu's mansion. If they were chased out like him, it would be very embarrassing. After such a thing happened, it would be difficult for the young man to raise his head in the capital in the future. This was just a small interlude, and did not spread to more places. Everyone's attention quickly shifted to other places. The young scholar's face was filled with excitement. He felt that he had done something amazing. The only regret was that the person had actually left just like that. If he had defended himself and refused to admit it, wouldn't it have been perfect if the king of Shu was alerted? Cui Yinxin looked in the direction of the door, and a cold smile appeared on his lips. He had only humiliated him once, which was far less than the humiliation he had brought to himself. There was still a long way to go. He did not mind settling the score slowly. This remote corner near the gate would not be valued by the king of Shu, nor would it be valued by the real bigwigs. The closer the seat was to the front, the more respected it was. It was also the focus of everyone's attention. How is old master doing recently? Li Xian, the king of Shu, smiled and asked a young man of the same age beside him. The young man smiled and said, "Your Highness, thank you for your concern. Grandpa has always been healthy." The king of Shu said, "Marquis Chun has made great contributions to the Jing kingdom. With the blessing of the country, you will definitely live a long life." There was not much courtesy between the young man and the king of Shu. The Chun family had always been on the side of the king of Shu, and they had known each other since childhood. He looked at the other person opposite him and said, "I didn't know that Qingyu had come to the capital city until today. Why didn't you inform me before?" Cui Qingyu smiled and said, "I just arrived the day before yesterday. I have been busy with other affairs these days, and didn't even have time to visit the king of Shu's mansion." After saying this, he raised the wine cup in front of him and said, "I will punish myself with a cup first." "1 cup is not enough. At least 3 cups. Another laughter came from the side and filled Cui Qingyu's cup again. "After so many years, Qingyu, you still haven't changed your bad habit." Cui Qingyu looked at the man and shook his head. He drank up the wine in his cup again. The 4 of them were chatting and laughing casually, but the people at the surrounding tables were not so relaxed. The reason was that apart from the king of Shu, the other 3 people were also very extraordinary. Chun Lijun, the eldest grandson of Marquis Chun, Cui Qingyu, the eldest grandson of the Cui family, and Qinyu, the only male heir of Marquis Qin. Any of their families could shake the whole capital city with a stomp of their feet. Chapter 379. I'll introduce someone to you later, the king of Shu suddenly said after the 4 of them chatted for a while. Although he was a prince, he did not put on any airs in front of these 3 people. Firstly, it was because they had grown up together, and had a good personal relationship. Secondly, it was because the three of them had strong backgrounds and were his strong supporters. Naturally, he treated them differently from others. "Oh, who is it?" Cui Qingyu was slightly surprised when he heard that. The person who could make the king of Shu introduce the three of them so seriously was naturally not a simple person. Otherwise, he would not have mentioned him in front of them. Chen Lijun's face also showed an expression of interest. Only the young man named Qin Yu was minding his own business and did not seem to be interested. "A very capable person," the king of Shu said with a smile. The king of Shu had been gathering talents from all over the world. Naturally, he would not let go of the son of Chang and county who was valued by his father. As early as 3 days ago, he had sent someone to send an invitation. However, he had to meet the 3 more important people today, so he did not look for him immediately. As for whether the son of Chang and county would attend the banquet, it was not within the king of Shu's consideration. He had not considered that possibility at all. Because the king of Shu kept them guessing, Cui Qingyu and Chen Lijun became even more interested in the person he was talking about. "Go and invite the son of Chang and county over." The king of Shu waved to a servant behind him and said. When the servant heard this, he respectfully responded and immediately left. "The son of Chang and county?" Cui Qingyu was slightly stunned when he heard that. It was his first time in the capital, and he was very unfamiliar with this name. When he first heard this name, Chen Lijun was stunned. After thinking for a while, he quickly had an impression. He frowned slightly and murmured, "It's actually him?" The king of Shu looked at him and asked doubtfully, "Li Jun knows him? Does he know him?" Chen Lijun nodded and said, "If there is no second son of Chang and county in the capital, and the son of Chang and county that your highness mentioned also has the surname Li, then it should be him." Seeing him frown, the king of Shu paused for a moment before asking, "The county magistrate of Chang, and is indeed surnamed Li Jun. Could it be that you have a grudge against him?" The Duke of Chun was his staunch ally, and the county magistrate of Chang and Li was a talent that he wanted to win over with all his might. Although the latter couldn't be of much help to him in his quest for the throne, there must be a reason why his imperial father valued him so much. Since he was useful to his imperial father, then he would definitely be useful to him as well. Moreover, he was eager to know what exactly was the divine punishment that allowed the Jing kingdom to defeat the Qi kingdom, even though it was weak. Therefore, the king of Shu did not want to see any conflict between the two of them. Chen Lijun shook his head and said, "That's not it. I've never met him before, and there's no enmity between us." After saying this, he changed the topic and said, "However, the Li family and my Chen family have a long-standing grudge. The son of Chang and county is the eldest grandson of the Li family. It is not wrong to say that he has a grudge against him." This time, it was the king of Shu's turn to frown. If there was a personal grudge between Chen Lijun and Li, he could mediate between them. There would always be a way to satisfy both of them. As long as there was no deep hatred between the two, the king of Shu would be able to let it go. And if there was a deep hatred between them, the county magistrate of Chang and would not have survived until now, based on Chen Lijun's character and background. What he did not expect was that this matter actually involved the house of Duke Chen. Even though he was the king of Shu, he could not completely ignore the feelings of the house of Duke Chen. Seeing the king of Shu frown, Chen Lijun smiled and said, "Your Highness, you don't have to take it to heart. After all, you have to focus on the overall situation. The grudge between our family and the Li family is just a small matter. It must not affect your Highness's important matters." Chen Lijun was naturally aware of what had happened to the Chen family recently. The emperor's attitude towards the county magistrate of Chang and was unclear. The Chen family would not anger the emperor because of a personal grudge. Although the Chen family would not do anything to him, it was hard for Chen Lijun to have a good impression of the county magistrate of Chang'an. However, to his surprise, the king of Shu seemed to think highly of this person. With this additional link, the Chen family had to let go of the old grudge. The king of Shu nodded, but did not say anything else. At this time, he did not know much about the county magistrate of Chang'an. If the county magistrate of Chang and was really capable, he had to mediate between the Chen family and the county magistrate no matter what. If Li Yi was just an undeserved reputation, he naturally would not interfere in this matter. In times of need, he would even stand on the Chen family's side. For them, there were no eternal friends or enemies. There were only eternal interests. As long as the interests were enough, enemies could also become friends. The king of Shu himself understood this principle, and so did the Chen family. At this moment, the servant who had just left came back. However, the expression on his face was a little hesitant, as if he wanted to say something. What happened? Where is the county magistrate of Chang'an? The king of Shu asked with a frown. Your Highness, the county magistrate of Chang'an is not here. The servant immediately replied. He didn't come tonight? The king of Shu frowned even more. Could it be that between him and Li Xian, Li Yi really chose the latter? No. The servant hurriedly explained. The county magistrate of Chang'an was here tonight. But just now, he was driven out by Steward Wu. What? The king of Shu slammed the table fiercely and stood up from his seat. The county magistrate of Chang'an was someone he attached great importance to. It could be said that among those present tonight, except for a few people, the mysterious county magistrate of Chang'an was the one he attached the most importance to. However, due to certain reasons, he did not reveal his importance in time. However, now, he was actually driven out by the steward of the prince's mansion? The king of Shu was extremely annoyed. He was the only one who had attended his father's private banquet. Even the king of Shu himself had not received such an honor. How could such a person be driven out of his own banquet? When they saw the king of Shu walking to a corner with a gloomy face, the expressions of everyone in the hall immediately changed. To be honest, after coming out of the banquet, Li did not feel embarrassed or disappointed at all. Instead, he felt a little happy. The banquet that he was willing to attend was the real banquet. It was better not to attend this so-called banquet that he obviously did not want to attend, but still had to go through the motions. After walking out of the king of Shu's mansion, Mississippi Lu followed behind him without saying a word. Li Yi had long been used to her silence, but he felt that this kind of silence was a little different today. At a certain moment, a cold voice suddenly came from behind. Will you offend the king of Shu if you just leave like this? Li Yi turned back to look at her and said in surprise. If I offend him, so be it. It's not a big deal. Today Mississippi Lu was a little strange. In the past she would never ask like this. Lu Rui looked up at him and said, You said that he is the future emperor. Not yet, right? Li Yi replied. Although he did not want to offend the king of Shu, it did not mean that he could not afford to offend him. The king of Shu had potential, but at least he was not the current emperor. Taking a step back, even if he really became the emperor in the future, he had nothing to lose. If he could not survive in the Jing kingdom, couldn't he go to another country? At worst, he could go to the northwest and occupy a mountain to be a bandit. If I did not ask you that, things would not be like this, right? Lu Rui lowered her head, and her voice was no longer as cold as before. This time, Li Yi was really a little shocked. Was this what Mississippi Lu should say? He took a step forward, put his palm on her forehead, and asked, You don't have a fever, do you? Lu Rui knocked his hand off. If it was in the past, she would definitely mock him. But today, she was not in the mood. She thought about it for a long time. If she had not asked that question with a sneer at the beginning, he would not have pretended to say such a joke, and things would not have become like this. However, in Willow Leaf Village, in Qing'an Prefecture, it had always been like this. They had always been getting along like this. Even she herself did not know why she liked to pick on him. However, in the face of his despicable answers, she often could not gain any advantage, and the possibility of being at a disadvantage was higher. Then, she naturally chose to hit him. This kind of life pattern had lasted for a long time. However, when did it change? From the time they came to the capital, became the magistrate of Chang'an County, and had so many princes and princesses. Even a joke would be chased out of the banquet. She did not like it here. This was not the life she wanted. She did not like this kind of life. Qing'an Prefecture was so good, and Willow Leaf Village was so good. There were no princesses or princes, and there were no magistrates or magistrates. There were candied haws and Rui nectar. Every day, they could learn from each other, in their own yard. This was what she liked. However, could she still go back? Could he still go back with her? Seeing Mississippi Lu's blank expression, Li Yi's expression changed slightly. He finally realized that something might have happened to her. This Lu Rui made him feel very strange. This was not the Lu Rui he knew. Hey, what's wrong with you, Lu Rui? Don't scare me. Li Yi was a little nervous. He patted her face. Damn it. Was there something dirty in the King of Shu's mansion? Was Mississippi Lu possessed? King of Shu. She had just said 2 words when she was interrupted by Li Yi. Nonsense, King of Shu. Even 10 kings of Shu can't compare to a hair of yours. Li Yi said impatiently. Why was she talking about the King of Shu at this time? He held her shoulder and asked, What's wrong with you? Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere? This place is not far from the palace. I'll go to the palace to find an imperial doctor. Hearing this, Lu Rui looked up at him, and her delicate body trembled slightly. Oh no, why are you trembling? Li Yi murmured. He looked even more anxious and hurriedly said, Hurry up. Let's go to the palace immediately. Fortunately, I didn't forget to bring the palace entry token today. Chapter 380. Li Yi was very anxious. Mississippi Lu was really ill, and seriously ill. The Mississippi Lu he knew traveled the world with a sword. She was not afraid of anything, not to mention the King of Shu. Even if the God of Heaven came, she would fight first. She would not talk as much as she did today. I'm fine. Hearing Li Yi's words, a complicated expression flashed across Lu Rui's face. She quickly recovered and shook her head. The King of Shu was a prince after all, and he was the prince most likely to inherit the throne. No one in the world would think that he was less important than a strand of their hair. However, even so, when she heard Li Yi say that without thinking, she was still very happy in her heart. She just did not show it. Really? Li Yi looked at her suspiciously and murmured, Is it because of her period that her mood is out of order? Then he denied this guess. After being together for so long, how could he not know when Mississippi Lu's period was? Even if she was out of order, it would not be in these few days. Moreover, her symptoms were not like this at that time. She should be looking for all kinds of reasons to fight with him. You don't have to worry about the King of Shu. I have even offended the Emperor. The King of Shu is nothing. Li Yi thought to himself that he had punched the Emperor's chest, asked an old eunuch to have a gay relationship with the Emperor, and the perfume he made almost caused the old Emperor to die in advance. Which of these things was not more serious than offending the King of Shu? But he was still standing here fine and well. Lu Rui glanced at him. Of course, she did not believe his words. However, seeing that he did not seem to care, she felt inexplicably relaxed. Don't worry. Li Yi patted her on the shoulder and said, The King of Shu is not easy to offend, but he is not the Emperor yet. He does not have the final say in the capital. Even if he really becomes the Emperor in the future, we can't afford to offend him, can't we? Li Yi looked confident and continued. The northwest is the border of 3 kingdoms. There are at least hundreds and thousands of mountain bandits. Not even the Qi kingdom can reach there, let alone the Jing kingdom. Don't you like being a mountain bandit? We can go there and occupy a few mountains with Fong and the others. I've even thought of the name of the stronghold. Let's call it Willow Stronghold. If you are not satisfied, we can call it Black Wind Stronghold, White Goat Stronghold, or anything else. What do you think? Isn't it good? Lu Rui stood rooted to the ground when she heard that. Moments later, her face lit up. She suddenly looked up at him and asked, Is what you said true? Do you really think so? If what I said is false, then let me. Li Yi hesitated and said, Let my family be rich and have 3 wives and 4 concubines, all of whom are beautiful maids. A few black lines appeared on Lu Rui's smooth forehead. Lu hadn't reached the realm of Soundless Sword. The only explanation was that her sword wasn't with her. "Where's your sword?" Lee let out a sigh of relief and immediately asked. "I think I left it in the shoe palace." Mississippi Lou's expression changed as well. When she came out of the shoe palace just now, her mind was filled with other things. She had completely forgotten about retrieving her sword. When the two of them turned around and walked back, Lee scolded. Look at you. What should I say about you? You're already 17 or 18 years old, but you're still so careless and forgetful. It'll be hard for you to find a husband in the future." Mississippi Lou's face was frosty. She only cared about walking and didn't say a word. "Don't be so quiet. I'm doing this for your own good. Your sister usually spoils you, but this can't go on. With such a temper, how can you get married in the future? Say something." "Shut up." After Mississippi Lou spoke, Lee didn't say anything. After saying so much, he felt a little thirsty. If he had known this would happen, he would have gotten a bottle of grape wine from the shoe palace. At least it could moisten his throat now. Fortunately, his words didn't go to waste. Finally, he managed to persuade Mississippi Lou to return to her normal self. Lou Rui was the one with the frosty face who drew her sword at the slightest disagreement. Lou Rui was the one with the dream of becoming the king of bandits. Lou Rui was the one who chose to solve the problem with violence after being humiliated into anger. She wasn't the one who compromised and was chased out of the banquet while worrying about offending people. Chapter 381. After walking out of the King of Shoes mansion, the two of them had talked a lot and had walked a long way. This meant that they still had to walk for a long time before they could return to retrieve their swords. Mississippi Lou didn't stay silent. She deliberately slowed down her pace and said, "Be a bandit, I'm just saying. We're going to stay in the capital city in the future, so we can't offend the future emperor. If you have a way, it's better to make up for it as soon as possible." She didn't tell the truth this time. She had always been active rather than quiet. Whether it was traveling the martial world with a sword or becoming a bandit, it was much more interesting than staying in one place quietly. However, this was just her opinion. These days, she had learned not to force her opinion on others. "Actually, I'm really not just saying." Lee curled his lips. How could he not know what Mississippi Lou was thinking? With her personality, would she stay in one place quietly? Mississippi Lou frowned. "In this peaceful world, where would we be bandits?" "Didn't I say it just now? In the northwest, between the high mountains and lofty ridges, the Jing Kingdom, the Qi Kingdom, and the Wu Kingdom have always been a lawless and chaotic land. There are countless bandits and horse bandits. They attack cities and rob traveling caravans. Because of the terrain, neither the Qi Kingdom nor the Jing Kingdom can send a large number of troops to encircle and suppress them. As for the Wu Kingdom, it's too busy to deal with its own internal strife. Moreover, the biggest group of bandits are the rebels of the Wu Kingdom, so they have no time to care about other things. It's a paradise for bandits." Lee looked at Mississippi Lou and sighed. He said with disappointment, "How many times have I told you to read more and gain more knowledge? But you just won't listen. Look, you're stupid when it's time to use it." Lou Rui clenched her teeth. She swore that if it weren't for the fact that she didn't have autumn water with her, she would have poked a few holes in his body. However, this could be done later. There was one thing she had to confirm now. "Do you really want to be a bandit?" She didn't raise her head to look at Li Yi. She seemed to ask casually, but in her heart, there was 30% nervousness, 30% expectation, 30% joy, and a part that even she didn't know what it was. Li Yi nodded and said, "If you are tired of this kind of life, or if you really have no way out, this is not a bad choice." "Why?" Mississippi Lou had a lot of questions today. "Because you like being a bandit." Lee looked back at her and said matter-of-factly. Lou Rui had to admit that her heart was beating wildly at this moment. She was 50% nervous and 40% happy, but there was also a complicated emotion that she still didn't know what it was. "How is it?" Lee suddenly asked, just as she was troubled by this feeling that she had never felt before. "What? How is it?" Lu Rui lowered his head and asked in a trembling voice, which was obviously different from usual. Are you touched by what I said? Li Yi turned around and said to her with a smile. Do you have a conscience? Do you want to repay me with something? Lu Rui's body trembled again. She thought to herself that he was teasing her on purpose just now. As she breathed a sigh of relief, her embarrassment immediately turned into anger. She asked with a frosty face, how do you repay me? For example, by marrying me? By marrying me? Li Yi looked at her from head to toe and said with a pout, you wish. I mean, do you have any special secret techniques that you can teach me? The kind that is very powerful. That way, if I were to encounter someone like that crazy monk again, at least I would have the ability to protect myself. In your dreams. Mississippi Lu's chest rose and fell, but she quickly regained her composure. When she opened her mouth, her voice became extremely cold. She said, all right, I happen to have a set of powerful palm technique that is a secret of our Lu family. It has always been passed down to the female disciples, and not the male disciples. I will make an exception and teach it to you now. In an instant, the wind from the palm whistled. The early spring actually had the somber feeling of late autumn. Li Yi limped towards the direction of the Shu King's residence. It was not because of the inhumane torture that second Miss Lu had inflicted on him, but because he had accidentally sprained his ankle when he was running away. Although it was not too serious, he still needed to limp to feel better. At this moment, the steward of the king of Shu's mansion, who had chased Li Yi and Qin Wanru out of the mansion, stood at the door with a pale face. He asked the servant who welcomed the guests, Did two people walk out of here just now? Yes, there were two people, a man and a woman. They are both young. The servant answered the steward's question honestly. He had been wondering why a guest had left when the birthday banquet had just begun. Now, seeing Steward Su's expression, the doubt in his heart deepened. Left. Hearing this, Steward Su's legs turned to jelly, and he almost fell to his knees. He knew very well that if the honored guest that the prince cared about had really left, he, who had chased him away, would have to bear the prince's wrath. That was obviously a young scholar sitting in the corner. These people would be present at every banquet in the Shu King's mansion. They did not have a strong background, and were destined to not have any great achievements. They were just a group of people who wanted to climb up the Shu King's mansion, just because they could recite a few lines of poetry. As the steward of the Shu King's mansion, he had chased them away. Moreover, young Master Cui had also asked him to do so. But he had never imagined that this person was actually the honored guest of the prince, to the point that the prince would personally ask about him. But since he was the honored guest, why was he sitting in such a position? All of this was no longer important. What was important was that the honored guest of the prince had left. He had chased him away. The scholar who had falsely accused the honored guest had already been beaten out of the back door. From then on, he would never be able to raise his head in the capital again. Thinking of the scholar's ending, Steward Su seemed to have already seen his dark future. No, he no longer had a future. If the heavens could give him another chance, he would definitely sew his mouth shut. That way, he would not say anything offensive and things would not have turned out this way. Finally, as if the heavens had heard his call, just as Steward Su's heart was sinking into a bottomless abyss, a somewhat familiar voice suddenly rang in his ear. To the current Steward Su, this voice was even more beautiful than the sounds of nature. I'm here to retrieve that sword. When I entered, I left it here, Li Yi said to the servant of the Prince of Shu's residence. The servant of the Prince of Shu's residence recognized this country bumpkin, and also remembered that before he entered, he had indeed left a sword here. It was on the table behind him. He thought to himself that the person who had just walked out of the residence was him. It seemed that Steward Su had also come out for him. The servant took the sword from the table behind him and handed it over. Li lowered his head to take a look. It was indeed Mississippi Lu's sword. She was still waiting for him, under the tree in front of him. Li took the sword and prepared to turn to leave. Just at this moment, he suddenly felt his calf tighten. When he looked down, he discovered that his leg was being hugged. The steward who had arrogantly asked him to leave the Prince of Shu's residence was now kneeling on the ground. One hand was hugging his thigh, and the other was slapping his own face. He wailed, "Just now, I had eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai. Please don't blame me. His Highness the Prince of Shu invites you back quickly." Chapter 382. Your Excellency, this way. Steward Su walked into the King of Shu's mansion again. As he led the way, his expression became even more humble. He bowed slightly, and even felt like he had survived a disaster. The servant at the door was stunned for a moment before he thought of something. When the woman entered the king's mansion just now, she seemed to have brought that sword with her. By the time he realized it, it was already too late. The figure of the woman had already disappeared. A trace of hesitation appeared on the servant's face. After a moment he shook his head. Since it was the honored guest of the King of Shu, there should be no problem. Moreover, the King of Shu had many experts around him. Even if there were really people with bad intentions, there was no need to worry too much. After all, Li Yi did not want to have a bad relationship with the King of Shu. Even if he did not want to be a friend, it was best not to become an enemy. When he walked back to the hall, a young man dressed in a luxurious robe with an air of nobility came out to greet him. Li Yi had seen the King of Shu once before. At this moment, he naturally recognized him at first glance. The servants in the mansion lack discipline. I will definitely teach them a good lesson when I go down. The King of Shu smiled and went forward to welcome him. I have offended County Magistrate Li. It is I's fault. I will drink a cup of wine as punishment later. From the point of view of a prince, the King of Shu's attitude was extremely kind. He did not put on any airs, and did things impeccably. Your Highness is too polite, Li Yi said with a smile. The King of Shu seemed to have completely forgotten what had just happened. He did not mention it at all. He personally welcomed Li Yi into the hall, and adjusted his seat to the seat at the front. Cui Yinxin stood in a corner, his face faintly pale. He had followed the King of Shu for a period of time, but he rarely saw the King of Shu so furious. This showed that the King of Shu was very angry just now. It also showed that the position of that person in the king's mansion was far more important than he had imagined. The entire hall was much quieter than before. Some people had seen with their own eyes that the young man had been driven out by the steward of the king's mansion. However, he returned so quickly, and was personally invited to the seat at the front by the King of Shu. The significance of that position was self-evident. However, there was no reason for them not to know someone who could sit in that position. However, that young man looked too unfamiliar. The King of Shu smiled and introduced to Cui Qingyu and the other two. This is Li Xianzi, whom I mentioned to you just now. Don't be fooled by his young age. Even I feel envious of father's evaluation and praise for him. After that, he introduced the three people behind him to Li Yi. Cui Qingyu nodded slightly to show that he knew Li Xianzi. Among all the people in the room, only a few people caught Cui Qingyu's attention, and this Li Xianzi was not one of them. Even a slight nod was already considered a great courtesy. When he heard the King of Shu introduce Chen Lijun, the eldest grandson of the Duke of Chen residence, a look of astonishment flashed across Li Yi's eyes. He did not expect to meet someone from the Duke of Chen residence here, and such an important person at that. He did not know what the eldest grandson of the Duke of Chen was thinking, but he actually smiled at Li Yi and nodded slightly like Cui Qingyu. This made Li Yi a little wary. This person was shrewd, and not suitable to be a friend. The last young man, Qingyu, did not wait for the King of Shu to introduce him. He put his arm around Li Yi's shoulder with a smile on his face, and said very enthusiastically, Qingyu, my family situation is similar to that of the one surnamed Chen. I like you very much. You are my friend for sure. He put his arm around Li Yi's shoulder, and seemed to be talking to him. However, when he spoke, his eyes were fixed on Mississippi Liu, who was behind Li Yi. Chen Lijun and Cui Qingyu looked at Qingyu in surprise. They were a little surprised by his behavior. However, when they saw the woman behind Li Xianzi, they immediately understood. Even with their status, they had seen countless beautiful women. They had to admit that the woman was indeed rare. It was no wonder that Qingyu would be so enthusiastic to a stranger. But soon after, a strange look appeared on their faces. With young Duke Qin here, he actually dared to bring his beautiful wife here. They did not know whether this Li Xianzi was smart or stupid. Seeing this, the king of Shu raised his eyebrows slightly. He knew Qin Yu's character very well. Usually, he did not care much about this, but this time, he did not want to see such a scene. Li Yi frowned. Although it was the first time they met, he did not have a good impression of this young Duke Qin. Of course, it was not only the way he looked at Mississippi Liu, but also the way he put his arm around Li Yi's shoulder. This is sister-in-law? Qin Yu's eyes flashed inexplicably. He looked at Mississippi Liu and asked Li Yi. No. Li Yi's face was expressionless as he said lightly. No. The excitement on Qin Yu's face disappeared, and he looked a little disappointed. But then he smiled and said, Same. If this continued, the atmosphere would be changed by Qin Yu. The king of Shu coughed lightly and said, Although Li Xianzi is young, what he has done is great for the country and the people. He is a pillar of our Jing kingdom. Because of this, my father made an exception and conferred him the title of nobility. He can be said to be the first person in the younger generation in recent years. When he said this, he did not deliberately lower his voice. So many people around heard him. Only then did the crowd realize that the person who was personally welcomed by the king of Shu was Li Xianzi, who had caused a lot of uproar in the capital recently. In recent days, many things about Li Xianzi had been mixed up, and his image had been covered with a layer of mystery in the hearts of the people. It was said that His Majesty had made an exception and conferred the title of nobility in recent years. It was said that His Majesty had not yet reached 20 years old. He wrote a good piece of calligraphy, which made Zhao Chun, the former best calligrapher of the younger generation, admit defeat. He was also well versed in Buddhism and was a close friend of Master Tan Yin. The story of him defeating the monks of the Qi Kingdom in the Cold Mountain Temple had even been made into a play and widely spread. His background was ordinary, but his network was extremely formidable, not to mention the crown prince of Prince Ning, who in the entire capital could have the friendship of the eldest princess. Moreover, it seemed that the king of Shu valued this person. It should be known that the king of Shu was much more important than the other two. Many people couldn't help but feel a little envious. His future was almost certain to be boundless. Even the king of Shu had shown an obvious intention to recruit him, which indicated that County Magistrate Li's meteoric rise was just around the corner. The only regret was that the beautiful Xiaonyang he brought with him was probably going to be killed by little Duke Qin. Thinking of little Duke Qin's special hobbies, the crowd could not help feeling a little pity. No matter what Li Xianzi would become in the future, he was just a county magistrate now. As far as they knew, none of the women who had caught his eye had ever escaped. Last year, or the year before last, in the capital, when the wife of a marquis attended a banquet, she caught the eye of young Duke Qin and was abducted within 2 days. In the end, the matter was left unresolved. Faced with the other party's background, even the marquis could only choose to swallow his anger, let alone an ordinary person. In this matter, there was not much difference between ordinary people and county magistrates. He just didn't know if Madman Qin would let Li Xianzi off for the sake of the king of Shu. Chapter 383. The scholarly man sitting at the head of the table was very young. He had just been driven out by the steward of the king of Shu's mansion, and had lost a lot of face. However, at this time, most people in the hall would not mock or ridicule him because of that, because the person sitting opposite him and chatting happily with him was the honorable king of Shu. The conversation between Li Yi and the king of Shu was actually not as chatting happily as most people thought. There was really nothing to talk about with a stranger. Li was not in a good mood tonight. The king of Shu obviously did not have the charisma of his father. Of course, another reason might be that there were a few dishes and a bowl of plain porridge on the table. The location was not the garden of Prince Ning's mansion, and the person opposite him was not the middle-aged high-ranking official, whom Li Yi had a good impression of at their first meeting. Your Highness, you flatter me. Li Yi had a faint smile on his face, but he kept a distance from the king. The king of Shu's intention to rope him in could not be more obvious. However, Li Yi did not expect that the way to rope him in was by praising him, saying that he was a young hero, a pillar of the country, and that if he succeeded the throne in the future, he would be heavily rewarded, saying that he was the blessing of the emperor, the blessing of the Jing kingdom, and so on. There were some words that even Li Yi himself felt a little embarrassed to hear. Perhaps the king of Shu was tired of praising and thirsty. Finally, he took a sip of tea, looked at Li Yi, and asked with a smile. General Su said in the letter that the soldiers of the Jing kingdom are invincible on the battlefield because of Tianfa. They can kill enemies and destroy cities. I wonder what this Tianfa is. How can it be so powerful? I heard that this Tianfa was created by Li Xianzi. I wonder if Li Xianzi can answer I's doubts? The king of Shu said with a smile, and then his eyes fell on Li Yi. Didn't His Majesty tell the king of Shu about it? Li Yi asked curiously. The king of Shu shook his head and said, My father didn't mention it. Li Yi thought for a moment, and quickly realized that although the name Sky Law had been circulating in the capital, it was not very popular. The higher-ups must have deliberately controlled the news in this area. However, even the king of Shu, the prince who was about to become the crown prince, did not know what heaven's punishment was. It seemed that the old emperor had kept this matter a secret to the extreme. This matter was too sensitive. Li Yi didn't want to test the old emperor's bottom line. He looked at the king of Shu and said, The matter of heaven's punishment is not a trivial matter. Since His Majesty didn't tell Your Highness, it means that Your Highness can't know about it. Moreover, His Majesty has issued an extremely strict gag order, so Li Yi did not finish his words. He believed that the king of Shu would definitely understand what he meant. Sure enough, the king of Shu was startled for a moment before he immediately smiled and said, Since father has given the order, I have been rude. The king of Shu laughed and drank the wine in his cup in one gulp. A trace of displeasure flashed across his face, which was covered by his sleeve. The son of Chang'an County? Not far away, Cui Qingyu played with the empty wine cup in his hand. After glancing in a certain direction, he seemed to unconsciously murmur, Your Highness's attitude towards him is really beyond my expectations. Chen Lijun's gaze paused there for a moment before he turned his head, and said while shaking his head, It was just a county. Even if he had some ability, there were many capable people under the king of Shu's command. Qin Yu's gaze did not move away from that direction. He nodded and said, It's really unexpected to meet such a woman tonight. Cui Qingyu and Chen Lijun glanced at him at the same time. With such a grandson, Prime Minister Qin's clean reputation should have been almost destroyed. He had a lot of wives and concubines in his residence, but he liked married women. As long as he liked a woman, he would use all means to get her. At that time, Qingyu did not care about his relatives. Anyone who tried to stop him was his enemy. He even got his hands on an uncle's concubine. When that uncle went to complain to Prime Minister Qin, he was kicked out of the room by Qingyu. From then on, Madman Qin's name spread. Although he was grounded by Prime Minister Qin for 2 months, he still did whatever he wanted after he was released. Regarding this, the Qin family could do nothing about it, because he was the only male descendant of the Qin family. In order to not let this family line end, as long as he didn't cause any scandals in the family, even Prime Minister Qin turned a blind eye to his actions. It was unknown how many memorials to impeach Qin Yu had been secretly suppressed. Chen Lijun looked at him and asked, Aren't you only interested in married women? When did your taste change? Hearing this, Qin Yu waved his hand and said, I've eaten too many salty things. Occasionally, I have to change to something sweet. What do you know? The two shook their heads and no longer cared about Qin Yu. They came to the prince's mansion tonight to discuss important matters, which represented the wishes of the family. His Majesty's attitude towards appointing a crown prince was not clear, and the joint memorials submitted by several ministers had been suppressed. A few days ago, the plan to unite with the Wang family by marriage had also failed. They did not win the support of the Wang family of Jiangyi, which was not good news for the king of Shu. In order to deal with the unexpected situation in the future, they had to make sufficient preparations. The two talked in secret for a while, and saw the king of Shu stand up and walk over. When the king of Shu sat down, Cui Qingyu looked at him and asked, "Is that person really that important? It's always good if we can win over the person that my father values." The king of Shu's face did not look very good. Just now, his intention to win over Li Xianzi was very obvious. But Li Xianzi kept changing the topic. No matter what promises he made, he did not show any willingness to be loyal. He did not know how to appreciate favors. Seeing the king of Shu's face, Cui Qingyu and the other two were slightly surprised. Obviously, the king of Shu did not get the result he wanted. He was actually rejected by the other party. How could this be possible? He was the king of Shu, not the king of Wei, Qi or Jin. He was the king of Shu, who was most likely to ascend to the throne. Compared to Qingyu, he was the real lunatic. "You don't like the king of Shu?" Lu Rui sat opposite Li Yi and looked up at him. Li Yi glanced at her and said, "Of course I don't like the king of Shu. I like your sister. And I also like silver, gold is fine too." Lu Rui did not look at him again, nor did she speak again. "We're going to be bandits in the future, so it's better not to get involved in this kind of thing." Li Yi added, he did not really like or dislike the king of Shu, but he did not want to get involved in his affairs. Since ancient times, those who got involved in such things did not end up well. Although the king of Shu was the favorite to win the championship, if he were to bet on him, he would probably get a lifetime of wealth. The opportunity that he had just turned down was something that countless people dreamed of. However, deep down, Li Yi was not optimistic about the king of Shu. Although the current emperor was unwell, after several interactions with him, Shanning had inadvertently revealed, and Li Yi had sensed from this country, the seemingly kind-looking middle-aged man was wise and far-sighted. He was a very qualified emperor. How could a qualified emperor leave the position of the Eastern Palace empty when his own life was about to end? Everyone in the world thought that this position should belong to the king of Shu, and so did the king of Shu and countless courtiers. However, this position did not belong to him yet, so it would never belong to him. It was not the king of Shu's turn to be the emperor, and of course, it was not his turn to sit on the throne. Since it had nothing to do with him, he would just let it go. Of course, apart from this, there were many other reasons. For example, the king of Shu was not handsome enough, and he did not like the clothes he wore today. Also, why was he called the king of Shu instead of Wei or Qi? Calling him Prince Jin sounded better than the king of Shu. He really did not like the two words king of Shu. It was not an exaggeration at all. He could give 10,000 reasons like this. Weren't these reasons enough? Chapter 384. I'm curious. What does your highness see in Li Yi? Chen Lijun's eyes paused in a certain direction for a moment. Then he turned his head and looked at the king of Shu with some doubts. Cui Qingyu also looked up at the king of Shu. He also had doubts about this matter. If Qin Haodong only knew how to compose a few poems and write a few articles, the king of Shu wouldn't even pay much attention to him. Just because his majesty valued him was not enough. Divine punishment, the king of Shu said in a low voice after a moment of silence. Chen Lijun and Cui Qingyu's pupils shrank slightly. They couldn't help but stand up straight. For some reason, the influence of the two words divine punishment did not spread in the capital city and was limited to some high-level officials. However, with their status, how could they not have heard of it? It was just that they didn't know the specific details of this matter. Even the elders in their families only knew that there was a heavily guarded place outside the city, which seemed to be related to divine punishment. His Majesty had firmly controlled this matter, so others knew very little about it. So what? What kind of person is your highness? He will know about this sooner or later. Qin Yu withdrew his gaze and said, In fact, your highness was a little reckless just now. Your highness still doesn't know about this matter, which means it's not time for your highness to know about it. If you act too impatient, You may arouse His Majesty's dissatisfaction. Even if you really know the secret of divine punishment, you will lose more than you gain. Chun Lijun and Cui Qingyu nodded. Although Qingyu didn't do proper work, it didn't mean that he was a complete playboy. On the contrary, his insight into things was often the sharpest among them. The Qin family was not only noble. Marquis Qin was also the right chief minister, and a veteran of 3 dynasties. The king of Shu couldn't get to where he was today without the advice of the Qin family. That makes sense. The king of Shu nodded. Qingyu's words were almost exactly the same as Li Xianzi's. The most important reason he wanted to win over Li Xianzi was to get divine punishment. Now, after Qingyu's reminder, he knew that he couldn't touch it now. When he could really touch it, Li Xianzi wouldn't be of much use to him. You guys talk first. I'll go over for a while. A mysterious smile appeared on Qingyu's face. After saying a few words to the 3 of them, he got up and walked off in a certain direction. After the king of Shu and the other 2 turned around to take a look, a strange expression appeared on their faces. Mississippi Lu did not speak. She felt a little bored sitting there. Her conversation with the king of Shu had ended on a sour note. Although she did not know if the king of Shu was a petty person who bore grudges, it was fortunate that she would not have to attend those messy banquets in the king of Shu's mansion in the future. Her time was precious and could not be wasted on these things. Just as she was thinking of an excuse to leave again, a figure suddenly appeared beside her. It was young Duke Qin. He looked at Mississippi Lu with a smile and asked, "May I know your surname, miss?" Li didn't know whether he should admire his foresight or his courage. When it came to this kind of thing, Mississippi Lu never cared about the little duke or the prince. The expression on her face did not change at all because of these words. She did not even lift her eyelids. Seeing this, the smile on Qingyu's face became even brighter. He continued, "Let me introduce myself. My name is Qingyu. The current chief minister is my grandfather. I wonder if I have the honor to buy you a drink." As expected, young Duke Qin likes that girl. What a pity, what a pity. Such a stunning beauty can't escape such a fate. That county magistrate Li really shouldn't have brought the girl here today. Doesn't he know that young Duke Qin will definitely be at the banquet of the king of Shu? Because of young Duke Qin's reputation, no one dared to say anything. Only in a remote corner far away, there were people whispering. Other than their small area, no one would be able to hear them. However, Li knew that Mississippi Lu must be able to hear it, because he could vaguely hear it himself. Then he began to feel a little uncomfortable. This young Duke Qin in front of him looked well dressed, but he was actually a beast inside. No, some of the things he did were even worse than a beast. Who knew what this beast was thinking in his heart when he was facing Miss Lu? Not to mention talking, Li felt that he was at a disadvantage, even if he just glanced at Mississippi Lu. Cui Yinxin, who was standing in the corner, still had a stunned expression on his face. He did not expect that things would turn around so quickly. Young Duke Qin likes that girl? Cui Yinxin's face quickly showed an expression of extreme surprise and pleasure. Everyone in the capital city knew about the relationship between young Duke Qin and the king of Shu. In this matter, he would definitely not help the guy from Qing'an Prefecture. Then, things would become much more interesting. If it were not for the fact that they were still at the banquet, Cui Yinxin would really want to look up to the sky and laugh. "Surnamed Li, you deserve this. Steward, please inform His Royal Highness the King of Shu that we still have some matters to attend to at home. We will take our leave first." Li stood up and said to the steward standing at the side. Steward Su nodded his head in shock. He looked at the young man whom he had just personally invited in, and thought to himself, the King of Shu is right there. If you want to say it, go and say it yourself. However, just as he was thinking about this, the 2 people whom he had just invited back had already stood up from their seats and walked out of the door. The King of Shu's expression did not look too good. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, they had directly left without saying a word. Furthermore, he had personally welcomed them just now. What would the crowd think of him? However, if he stood out now, it would be making a big fuss over a minor issue. He snorted coldly and did not say anything. "This lady, you won't even give me this face, will you?" Just as Li Yi was about to walk out of the door, a voice suddenly came from behind him. A hand reached out from behind him and reached out to grab Mississippi Lu's shoulder. Qin Yu had a faint smile on his face. Those who were familiar with him would feel a chill run down their spines when they saw this expression. However, the smile on his face quickly disappeared. This was because before his hand could touch the woman's shoulder, a hand reached out from the side and grabbed his wrist. That person was so fast that Qin Yu did not even see it clearly. A skinny man behind Qin Yu saw it clearly. A trace of surprise appeared on his face. He moved slightly and stood behind Qin Yu. Qin Yu's smile disappeared. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Li Xianzi. He was no longer as enthusiastic as when they first met. He said indifferently, "If you don't let go of him after 3 breaths, I will chop off his hand." The skinny man behind Qin Yu nodded expressionlessly. One of his hands was already on the hilt of the saber at his waist. The king of Shu faintly heard his voice. He frowned slightly, stood up from his seat, and walked out. This was the king of Shu's mansion. Qin Yu could make a scene, but he could not go too far. If Li Xianzi's hand was really chopped off here, it would be a troublesome matter for him. One reason was that it would be difficult to explain it to the emperor. Another reason was that he could not explain it to Emingzu. Even if he became the crown prince, he would not be able to get away with it. When everyone heard Qin Yu's words, they could not help but shiver. Crazy Qin was indeed Crazy Qin. This was the king of Shu's mansion. Under the watchful eyes of the public, he chopped off someone's hand and foot without saying a word. In the entire capital city, he was probably the only one who dared to do this. After saying that, Qin Yu automatically ignored Li Yi. His face regained a kind smile. He looked at the beautiful woman in front of him and said, "Gu." He only said one word before he stopped abruptly. The expression on his face was very stiff, and a trace of disbelief appeared in his eyes. This was because an ice-cold long sword was placed on his neck. This sword was very sharp. Qin Yu could even feel a line of blood being drawn on his neck. At this moment, he really felt that his life and death were only a matter of seconds. The woman looked at him with an emotionless gaze. She only said one word. Her voice seemed to come from the depths of hell, turning to ice when it touched the ground. "Get lost." That was what the woman said. Qin Yu's face was completely pale. He felt that his neck was a little wet and hot, probably because of blood flowing out. The pupils of the thin man behind him suddenly shrank. He held the hilt of his sword with one hand, but he did not have the strength to pull it out. Fast, too fast. It was a speed that exceeded his imagination. The two of them had not exchanged blows, but he already knew very well that this young woman's strength was much, much higher than his. This was also one of the reasons why he did not have the courage to pull out his sword. His heart was instantly filled with endless fear. With the power that she had displayed with her sword just now, it would only take a thought for her to kill the heir to the High Duke. Even His Highness the King of Shu would be in danger. If she was willing. The thin man could not help but curse in his heart. What were the people of the King of Shu doing? How could they allow such an expert to bring a weapon in? Quickly let go of the little duke. Otherwise, no matter who you are, you will not be able to bear the consequences. The thin man said in a low voice. If anything happened to the little Duke Qin, not only would the other party not be able to bear the consequences, even he himself would not be able to bear it. He and his family would all be responsible for this. Of course, if anything happened to His Highness the King of Shu, even more people would be implicated. Time seemed to stop for a moment. Lu Rui frowned, as if he was thinking about whether to put down his sword, or to kill him, and then kill his way out with Li Yi. Not long after, Qin Yu and the thin man only saw a flash of white light before their eyes. The woman's sword had already been sheathed again. Interesting. Although Qin Yu's face was pale, a strange smile appeared on his face. He reached out and wiped his neck, licking the blood off his fingers with his tongue. A bloodthirsty light seemed to flash in his eyes. What's going on? From the moment Mississippi Lu drew her sword to the moment she sheathed it, only a very short time had passed. When the King of Shu walked out, he only saw the tense atmosphere outside. A dozen guards of the king's mansion surrounded the two people. The thin man behind Qin Yu looked as if he was facing a formidable enemy. As for Qin Yu, the king of Shu knew from his expression that he was about to go crazy again. Your Highness, this woman wanted to assassinate the little Duke Qin just now. A guard of the king's mansion immediately came forward and reported, this woman is extremely dangerous. Your Highness, please stay away for the time being. For them, the safety of the king of Shu was the most important. At this time, several people immediately stood in front of the king of Shu and looked warily at the woman holding the sword. The king of Shu was shocked when he saw the bloodline on Qin Yu's neck and the sword in the woman's hand. Someone actually dared to kill the eldest grandson of the Qin's mansion with a sword in the king of Shu's mansion? And this person was the woman beside Li Xianzi. The people in the hall could no longer sit still and rushed to the door. After realizing what had just happened, their faces were filled with shock. Although countless people in the capital wanted to kill Qin Yu with a sword, it was the first time that someone dared to do so. They wanted to curry favor with the king of Shu because of his current status and future potential, but it didn't mean that they had to kneel down and lick Qin Yu's boots. As for Li Xianzi and that heroine, let's call her heroine for the time being, they still had some respect in their hearts. After all, what they thought was one thing, and what they did was another. They admired Li Xianzi for having the courage to put a sword against Qin Yu's neck. After the admiration, of course they felt pity. This kind of pity was for what they would face. They committed murder in the prince's mansion and attempted to assassinate little Duke Qin. Under the eyes of the king of Shu, if this crime was confirmed, what awaited them would be terrible things. Just as they were thinking about this, they heard a faint voice with a hint of inquiry in it. Li Yi turned his head to look at the king of Shu and asked, Your Highness, can we go now? For a moment, everyone couldn't come back to their senses. Couldn't Li Xianzi see the situation in front of him clearly? Just now, the woman put a long sword on the little Duke Qin's neck. It would be more difficult for them to leave here tonight than to ascend to heaven. The king of Shu was a little stunned at first, and then he was a little puzzled. He wondered why Li Xianzi said these words just now. Do you think it's appropriate to let you leave like this? It seemed that because of the injury on his neck, Qin Yu tilted his head. Although he was smiling, he looked quite funny. I think it's quite appropriate. Li looked at him and said. Then he looked at the king of Shu and asked, Your Highness, what do you think? The doubt and astonishment on the king of Shu's face disappeared. He suddenly realized that Li Xianzi seemed to be a little different from before. The king of Shu looked at him and said indifferently, You hurt someone in the prince's mansion with a sword. I'm afraid I can't let you leave so easily. If Li Xianzi had given him a satisfactory answer, the king of Shu wouldn't have minded intervening at this time. Qin Yu was a lunatic, but even if he was really crazy, he couldn't completely ignore the king of Shu's opinion. Unfortunately, the king of Shu didn't intend to do this for an unrelated person. He pointed to the guards of the prince's mansion and said, Men, arrest them and hand them over to the authorities. This was the capital city. Even though he was a king, he didn't have the authority to arrest people. It was fine if they did it secretly. However, under the watchful eyes of so many people, a viscount was involved. Everything had to be done according to the law. After receiving the king's order, the guards of the prince's mansion were about to step forward when they suddenly heard the sound of a sword. When they saw the woman draw her sword again, they immediately became vigilant. The king of Shu narrowed his eyes and said coldly, Do you still want to assassinate I? You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.